She had everything: billions, power, a name that made boardrooms go quiet. Then her heart stopped on live television, and suddenly, none of it mattered. He had nothing left to prove: a small town doctor, a pickup truck, and a little girl who called him Dad. He'd walked away from the greatest surgical career of his generation, on purpose, and he swore he'd never go back. But some things don't ask permission. Stay until the end, hit like, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning Liam Carter's old life came looking for him, he was elbow deep in a broken kitchen sink. It was just past 6:30 on a Tuesday in late November, the kind of cold that Montana doesn't ease you into. It just arrives, full weight, like something that's been waiting outside the door all autumn. The pipes under the sink had been giving him trouble since October. He'd patched them twice. This was the third time, and he was starting to think the house was winning. "Dad?" Sophie's voice floated in from the hallway. She was 8 years old and had recently developed the habit of saying his name like it was a complete sentence. "Yeah, Bug. There's something on the news." "There's always something on the news." "Dad?" He pulled his head out from under the cabinet and looked at her. She was standing in the doorway in her pajamas, the ones with the little foxes on them that she'd had since she was 6 and refused to throw away, even though the cuffs barely reached her wrists anymore. Her hair was a mess. She was holding a bowl of cereal in both hands and looking at him with that expression she got sometimes, the one that reminded him, painfully, of her mother. "What is it?" he said. "A lady collapsed. On TV, like, in front of everyone." Liam set down his wrench and stood up slowly. His knees weren't what they used to be. He was 32, which wasn't old by any reasonable measure, but some years count for more than others, and the last 4 had counted for a lot. He followed Sophie into the living room. The TV was tuned to one of the cable news channels. He wasn't sure which one; they all looked the same to him. On the screen, a woman was being half-carried, half-dragged off a stage by 2 men in dark suits, while the crowd in the background descended into the particular kind of panic that looks organized on the outside and isn't at all. Security personnel were moving in from the sides. Someone had knocked over a microphone stand. The chyron at the bottom of the screen was already doing its job. AVA Sinclair, CEO of Syntech Medical, collapses during live investor conference. Condition unknown. Liam stood very still. On screen, they were showing the footage from 30 seconds earlier, before the collapse, while she was still at the podium. Ava Sinclair was young, maybe 30, and she carried herself with the particular confidence of someone who had spent years learning to be the most composed person in any room. She was mid-sentence, talking about quarterly projections or fourth-quarter targets or whatever it was that people talked about at investor conferences, when something changed. It was subtle. That was the thing. If you weren't looking for it, you'd have missed it entirely. A slight pause, a shift in posture. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just a few degrees of adjustment, like she was trying to redistribute weight she hadn't been carrying a moment before. Her left hand moved to the podium and stayed there. Her eyes, which had been tracking the teleprompter with professional smoothness, went briefly somewhere else. Somewhere internal. Then her knees went. She didn't crumple. She didn't fall dramatically the way people fall in movies. She went sideways first, caught herself for one impossible half-second, and then the lights went out and she went with them. Sophie sat down on the couch beside him. "Is she dead?" "I don't know," Liam said, which was honest. But he was already thinking something else. He was thinking about a case from 6 years ago. A patient, 53 years old, looked perfectly healthy on paper. Triathlete, non-smoker. Cholesterol so clean it had made the attending residents jealous. And then, one afternoon, she'd come into the ER after collapsing at a charity gala, and everyone had been looking in all the wrong places, and Liam had been the one to catch it, a specific catastrophic abnormality in the electrical conduction system of the heart. Rare enough that most cardiologists went entire careers without seeing it, lethal enough that if you didn't catch it fast, it didn't matter. He watched the footage again. The way Ava Sinclair had gone sideways first. The way her hand had stayed on the podium even as her body gave up. The particular sequencing of it. "Stop," he told himself. "You don't do that anymore." He went back to the kitchen. He picked up his wrench. He got back under the sink. His phone rang 11 minutes later. Aachen. He didn't recognize the number. It was a 212 area code, which meant New York, which meant nothing good for him personally. He let it ring. It rang again. He let it ring again. The third time, Sophie yelled from the living room, "Dad, your phone!" "I know. It's ringing." "I know, Bug. Are you going to—" He answered it. "Dr. Carter." The voice on the other end was male, measured, the kind of voice that belonged to a man who was used to being the person who made calls like this. "My name is Richard Harmon. I'm the chief medical officer at Meridian General Hospital in Manhattan. I apologize for reaching out directly. I'm told you left medicine 4 years ago." 3.5, Liam said, which surprised him. He hadn't expected to correct the man. 3.5, Harmon repeated. "I see. I'll be direct with you, Dr. Carter. Ava Sinclair was brought to our facility 40 minutes ago. We have an excellent cardiac team, the best available in the country, arguably. And we're having difficulty characterizing what's happening with her. She isn't responding the way we'd expect." Liam was quiet. "Someone on my team, a younger resident actually, mentioned your name, said they'd studied a case you documented in 2019, something about a conduction abnormality that—" "I know what case," Liam said. "We think it might be relevant." "It might be." A pause. "Dr. Carter, this woman is 30 years old. She has a company of 18,000 employees. She has a family. And right now the situation is critical. We need someone who has seen this before." Liam looked at his hand, still holding the wrench, knuckles scraped from the pipework. There was grease under his fingernails that was going to take 3 rounds of washing to get out. "I've been out of surgical practice for 3.5 years, he said. "I'm aware. My license is current, but I haven't been in an OR. "I'm aware of that too." "Then you know you're asking a lot." "I know," Harmon said. "I know exactly what I'm asking." He sat at the kitchen table for a long time after he hung up, long enough that Sophie came in and refilled her cereal and ate half of it standing up, watching him before she said anything. "You're doing the face," she said. "What face?" "The one where you're trying to not think about something." He looked at her. "You're 8. "I know." "When did you get this perceptive?" She shrugged. "Mrs. Dalby says I'm observant." "Mrs. Dalby's right." He rubbed the back of his neck. "There's a woman in New York. She's sick. They want me to come look at her." Sophie was quiet for a moment, processing this the way she processed most things, carefully, without rushing. "Like a doctor thing?" "Yeah, a doctor thing." "But you said you weren't doing doctor things anymore." "I know what I said." Another pause. She stirred her cereal. "Is she going to die?" He thought about the footage on the news, the way Ava Sinclair had gone sideways. "Maybe. If nobody figures out what's wrong with her." "And you think you can figure it out?" "I don't know, Bug." "But you think you might?" He didn't answer that, which was, he knew, its own kind of answer. Sophie set her bowl down on the counter and walked out of the kitchen. He heard her in her room. The sound of drawers opening, the particular thump of her trying to reach something on the top shelf of her closet. She came back 3 minutes later. She had her backpack on and her winter coat, which she hadn't bothered to zip. "What are you doing?" Liam said. "Getting ready." "Ready for what?" She looked at him like the answer was obvious. "To go to New York." He almost said no. That was the honest thing to say. He stood in the kitchen and ran through the reasons in his head the way he always did, methodically, like a checklist. Sophie had school. He had patients, 11 scheduled appointments this week. The roads were bad, had been bad since Sunday's storm, and driving to New York in late November in a truck with a heating system that worked about 60% of the time was not anyone's idea of a smart plan. And then there was the other thing. The thing underneath all the practical reasons. The thing he didn't say out loud to Sophie or to himself on most days because on most days he was pretty good at not saying it. He didn't want to go back. Not to New York, not to a hospital, not to a surgical suite with its particular cold smell and its particular cold light and everything that went with it. He'd left that world for a reason that still hurt in the specific permanent way that some things never stop hurting. But he thought about the footage. He thought about a 30-year-old woman going sideways on a stage. He thought about what he knew and what no one else in that hospital probably knew. And he thought about what it meant to have knowledge that could save someone's life and choose not to use it. He'd had that thought before. 4 years ago. In a different context, it hadn't ended well. "All right, yeah," he said. Sophie's face did something complicated. Relief, and also something older than relief. "But you zip that coat," he said. "It's cold." They left before 8. His truck was a 2009 Ford F-150 in a shade of dark blue that had faded over the years into something closer to gray. It had 214,000 miles on it and a crack in the passenger side windshield that he'd been meaning to fix since August. The heater worked today, which felt like a small victory. Sophie had packed her backpack with books and her sketch pad and a bag of trail mix because she was 8 and understood logistical planning better than most adults Liam knew. She was asleep before they hit the highway. He drove through the dark. This part of Montana in late November looked like the world had run out of color. The fields on either side of the highway were white and flat and going nowhere. The sky was the particular gray that arrives before snow and stays after it. The road was clear for now. The county had salted it that morning, but there were clouds building in the west that he didn't like. He drove and tried not to think, which was something he'd gotten better at over the years. Living alone, mostly, raising a kid alone, you developed certain mechanisms. You got good at being present in the moment, at fixing the immediate problem in front of you. The sink, the appointment, the school lunch, the permission slip. You got good at not looking too far ahead or too far back. The radio picked up a station out of Billings. Country music, then news. He caught a few fragments. Ava Sinclair, Meridian General, condition remains critical. Syntex stock down 11% in after-hours trading. He turned it off. His wife's name had been Mara. He didn't think about her every day anymore. That was a thing people didn't tell you about grief. That the dailiness of it fades, eventually. That you can go a whole Tuesday without thinking about someone who used to be the central fact of your existence. He wasn't sure some days whether that was healing or just forgetting. He suspected it was a little of both, and that the distinction didn't matter as much as he'd once thought. Mara had been a pediatric nurse. She'd worked at the same hospital where Liam had been the golden boy of the cardiac surgery department, back when he was the kind of surgeon whose name appeared in journals and at conferences, and on the short list for awards he'd been too busy to go pick up. They'd met in an elevator, which was embarrassingly cliché, and he'd proposed on a Tuesday in March because she'd said once, offhandedly, that she liked Tuesdays, but nothing ever seemed to happen on Tuesdays, she'd said, which meant they were safe, somehow. Reliable. He'd thought that was a beautiful way to see the world. She'd gotten pregnant with Sophie during a period when they were both working too much and sleeping too little and eating takeout 4 nights a week, and neither of them had planned it, and both of them had been terrified. And then Sophie had arrived on a Monday morning in April, and everything had reorganized itself around her. For 2 years, they'd been figuring it out together. Sleep deprivation and mismatched schedules and all the small daily negotiations of 2 people building something. Liam had been pulled in about 6 directions at once. The career still accelerating, the new fatherhood, the marriage that needed more attention than he was giving it. And he'd been managing, he'd thought. He'd thought they were managing. Then Mara had gotten sick. It wasn't what killed her. That was the thing he'd had to learn to say, because it was true, and because the alternative, the narrative where her illness caused her death, was too simple. And the truth was more complicated and worse. She'd developed a serious infection, post-operative, after a routine procedure for something minor. The infection had been manageable, was manageable for a while, but there was a drug protocol at the hospital, an administration policy pushed through by the executive board designed to reduce pharmaceutical costs, that had delayed her treatment by 36 hours because the specific antibiotic she needed fell into a category that required 3 levels of approval. 36 hours. He'd been at the hospital, had been in surgery, a 7-hour procedure on a 60-year-old man who'd survived because Liam had been at his best that day, hands steady, mind clear. While Mara, 2 floors up, had been waiting. While people had filled out forms and routed approvals, she died on a Thursday. Sophie was 2. Liam had tried afterward to do what you were supposed to do. He'd tried to stay. He'd gone back to surgery. He'd worked, because work was the thing he knew, the container that had always held him together. For 8 months, he'd tried. Then he'd done something he'd never regretted, even on the hard days. He'd picked up his daughter, sold the apartment, and driven to a small town in Montana where the loudest thing at night was the wind and where nobody knew his name, and he'd become a different kind of doctor. A country doctor. A house call doctor. A clinic twice a week, show up when people need you doctor. It wasn't what he'd trained for. It wasn't what he was best at, but it was what Sophie needed. And after Mara, what Sophie needed had become the only compass he trusted. They stopped in Bismarck around 4 in the afternoon at a diner off the highway that Sophie declared was perfect because it had checkered floors and a jukebox that still worked. She ordered a grilled cheese and ate it with the focused efficiency of someone who'd been in a car all day and was ready for something to happen. Liam had coffee and a bowl of soup that was better than it had any right to be. "Are you scared?" Sophie asked between bites. "Of what?" "Going back. To the hospital stuff." He looked at her. She was watching him with those brown eyes that were too serious for her face, too old for her age. Though he'd been told by enough people that you couldn't blame that on him. That Sophie had simply been born this way. An old soul, his mother-in-law had said once, before she'd stopped speaking to him entirely, which was its own story. "Yeah," he said. "A little." She nodded, like this was reasonable. "Mom would say that was okay." He was quiet. "She would," Sophie said with the certainty of someone who had made peace with not having enough information, who had simply decided that the parent she didn't remember had been generous and wise. Liam didn't know if that was true. He hoped it was. "She probably would," he said. Sophie finished her grilled cheese. "I think you should do it," she said. "The doctor thing, even if it's scary." "Yeah?" "Yeah. Because you know stuff nobody else knows, and if you don't use it, it's kind of like," she frowned, searching for the right word, "like hoarding." He almost laughed. "Hoarding. Like hoarding knowledge." She was very serious about this. "That seems bad." "You might be right," he said. "I usually am," she said, and finished her milk. They drove through the night. The snow caught up with them somewhere in Minnesota. Not a blizzard, but persistent. The kind that salts the windshield and requires both wipers on high and a speed reduction that adds an hour to every 3. Sophie slept in the passenger seat, one cheek against the window, breath fogging the glass. Liam drove in the particular silence of a man who had been alone with his thoughts for long enough that they'd stopped being thoughts and become something more like weather. Something you moved through rather than something you managed. He thought about the case from 2019, the triathlete. Her name had been Carol, and she'd spent 4 days in his ICU before she'd been well enough to go home, and she'd sent him a card at Christmas for 2 years afterward and then stopped, which was what happened. People got better and moved back into their lives, and that was right, that was the point. He thought about what Harmon had described on the phone, the presenting symptoms that were there, the ones that weren't, the way the standard interventions weren't landing the way they should. He ran through possibilities in his head the way he used to, in the years when he'd done this every day. A kind of mental differential diagnosis, ruling in, ruling out, following the logic. He hadn't done this in years and was surprised to find that the machinery still worked, that the knowledge was still there, in exactly the configuration he'd left it, which was uncomfortable, in a way he didn't fully examine. He drove. The snow kept up. Sophie slept. Around 2 in the morning, somewhere in Ohio, she woke up and looked at him. "You've been awake this whole time," she said. "I've been driving this whole time," he said. "Someone has to. You should stop. Take a break." "I'm fine." "Dad." He pulled into a rest stop 20 minutes later and slept in the driver's seat for 2 hours, head back, arms crossed, not exactly comfortable. Sophie pulled a blanket from her backpack. She had a blanket in her backpack, of course she did, and spread it over him without waking him up. When he woke and looked at her, She was reading in the passenger seat with her phone flashlight, perfectly content. "You're a strange kid," he told her. "I know," she said, without looking up. But they hit Manhattan at 7:43 in the morning, which was the wrong time to hit Manhattan in any circumstance, but was particularly wrong on a morning when the overnight news cycle had established that one of the most famous businesswomen in the country was in a hospital somewhere in Midtown, and every news van and satellite truck in the eastern seaboard had apparently decided that the surrounding blocks were a good place to park. Liam hadn't been to New York in 4 years. The city had not changed. The city, he suspected, did not change on the scale of 4 years. It simply continued being what it was, enormous and indifferent and relentlessly itself. He found a parking structure 3 blocks from the hospital that cost an amount of money he didn't let himself think about, and he and Sophie walked through the cold, their breath visible in front of them, Sophie's hand in his, her backpack bouncing. "It's loud," she said. "It's always loud." "I like it," she said after a moment. He glanced at her. "Yeah? There's a lot happening." "There's a lot happening," he agreed. The hospital entrance came into view. Meridian General. He'd heard of it. Everyone in medicine had heard of it, the way everyone who plays baseball has heard of certain stadiums. It had the kind of architecture that was designed to communicate permanence and excellence. Stone facade, tall windows, the understated prestige of a place that didn't need to advertise. There were 2 news vans on the street outside it, a cluster of photographers, a line of black SUVs. Liam stopped on the sidewalk and looked at it. Sophie looked up at him. She didn't say anything. He took a breath. The cold air was sharp and specific, not like Montana, not like outdoors, but like New York outdoors, which had its own particular quality. He remembered that quality. He hadn't known he remembered it. "Okay," he said. He pushed through the revolving door. The lobby was white and high-ceilinged and busy in a controlled, professional way. People in scrubs, people in suits, the constant quiet movement of an institution that didn't stop. There was a security desk immediately inside the entrance, and behind it a man who looked at Liam's coat, worn Carhartt, collar pulled up against the cold, with the particular professional neutrality that meant he'd drawn a conclusion and was waiting to be corrected. "Can I help you?" the man said. "Liam Carter. I'm here to see Richard Harmon." A pause. "And you are—" "Dr. Liam Carter. He's expecting me." There it was. The slight recalibration that happened when people had to adjust what they were seeing. The security guard's expression didn't change exactly, but something behind it did. "One moment." He made a call. Liam stood with his hands in his pockets. Sophie stood beside him and looked at everything on the ceiling, the people, a woman in surgical scrubs who walked by eating a granola bar, a cart of medical equipment being wheeled toward the elevator bank. "Cool," Sophie said quietly to herself. 3 minutes later, a man came out of an elevator and walked toward them with the purposeful stride of someone who'd been awake since before either of them had arrived in the state. He was in his 50s, gray at the temples, the kind of lean that came from a career of too many skipped lunches. His white coat was immaculate. His expression was controlled in a way that said it was costing him something. "Dr. Carter." He extended his hand. "Richard Harmon." "Dr. Harmon." Liam shook it. "This is my daughter, Sophie." Harmon looked at Sophie with the momentary surprise of someone who hadn't accounted for this variable, then looked back at Liam. "I wasn't aware you'd be bringing—" "She goes where I go," Liam said simply. Something in Harmon's face moved slightly. A recalculation. "Of course. We can arrange for her to wait somewhere comfortable." "That'd be appreciated." They rode the elevator up. Harmon was quiet for a moment, and then, "How was the drive?" "Long?" "You drove from Montana." "I don't fly." Another recalculation. "Right." Sophie looked at the floor numbers as they changed. Liam looked at Harmon. "Tell me where she is." She was in the cardiac intensive care unit on the 8th floor, and the corridor outside it was the most populated he'd ever seen a hospital corridor, which was saying something. There were people in white coats, people in business clothes, at least one man in a suit who did not look like any kind of medical professional and was almost certainly some kind of attorney. There was the ambient, low-level tension of people who were very good at their jobs confronted with a situation that was exceeding their competence and who had not yet fully admitted that to themselves. A woman detached herself from a group near the nurses' station and walked toward them. She was in her 40s, short hair, dark eyes, the look of someone who had been awake longer than Harmon and was managing it better. "Dr. Carter." She didn't extend her hand. "I'm Dr. Patricia Sung, Chief of Cardiology." "Dr. Sung." Her eyes moved over him, the Carhartt coat, the scrape on his knuckles from the sink, the fact that he'd slept in a rest stop in Ohio, and it showed. She didn't say anything about any of it. "I've read your 2019 case documentation," she said. "The Hendricks case." "Carol Hendricks." "Yes." A brief pause. "You think this is similar?" "I think it might be." "Based on a news broadcast." "Based on what I saw in the footage," he said, "and what Dr. Harmon described on the phone. You can tell me I'm wrong, but you haven't been able to tell each other what's right, have you?" It wasn't an accusation. He said it flatly, as a fact, and she received it the same way, with the specific discomfort of someone who recognized a truth they hadn't wanted stated out loud. "Come and look at her scans," Sung said. He followed her. Behind him, Harmon was arranging for Sophie to be taken to a small waiting area with a couch and a TV. Liam heard Sophie say, in her polite, matter-of-fact way, "Do you have any granola bars? I saw that lady with a granola bar." He almost smiled. The scans were on a large screen in a consultation room down the corridor, 5 of them arranged around the table. Sung, Harmon, 2 cardiologists Liam didn't know, and a senior resident who looked like she hadn't slept since Ava Sinclair had collapsed. Liam stood at the screen for a long time. The room was quiet in the specific way that rooms go quiet when people have been arguing and have temporarily run out of arguments. He looked at the echo. He looked at the EKG strips. He looked at the MRI sequences, and then he went back to the EKG strips, and he looked at something specific in the waveform pattern that he'd seen once before. A particular deformity in the relationship between 2 waves that didn't announce itself dramatically, but changed everything if you knew what you were looking at. "There," he said. He pointed. Sung leaned in. "The T-wave morphology." "Not just the morphology. Look at the interval, and look at it here and here. It's consistent. It's not artifact." One of the cardiologists, mid-40s, confident body language, the manner of someone who'd been the most experienced person in most rooms he'd been in, said, "That's within normal variance for a patient presenting with—" "It's not variance," Liam said. "It's a pattern. It's subtle, which is why it reads as variance if you're not looking for it specifically." He straightened up. "Has anyone pulled a family history? Extended family history, grandparents, cousins?" Sung frowned. "Why?" "Because this condition has a genetic component that's strong enough that if she has it, there's probably someone in her family who died young and unexpectedly. It might have been attributed to something else. It usually is." A silence. The senior resident, Dr. Okafor, her badge said, looked at her tablet and started scrolling. "Her father," she said, "died at 41, initially attributed to sudden cardiac arrest, but there's a note in the intake history from her assistant saying her father died during—" She frowned. "During a routine stress test." The room was quiet. Liam turned back to the screen. "She needs an electrophysiology study, right now, and she needs—" He stopped. "Is she on amiodarone?" "We started her on it 2 hours ago," said the confident cardiologist. Liam kept his voice level. "Stop it." "I'm sorry." "Stop the amiodarone, now." He looked at Sung. "If this is what I think it is, the amiodarone is making it worse. The pharmacodynamics of this particular conduction abnormality interact badly with class 3 antiarrhythmics. You're not stabilizing her. You're—" A monitor alarm from down the corridor went off. 1 alarm, and then 2, and then the particular rapid sequence of alarms that everyone in that room recognized. The world moved very fast after that. He found out later that Ava Sinclair had flatlined at 7:58 in the morning, 9 minutes after Liam Carter had walked into Meridian General Hospital. He found that out later. In the moment, he was running. He didn't remember making the decision. He was just suddenly in the corridor, moving toward the sound of the alarms sung beside him and the other doctors behind them, the resident Okafor already ahead of them. He pushed through the door of her room. She was 30 years old and she looked small in the bed, which surprised him somehow, though it shouldn't have. He'd seen CEOs and executives in hospital beds before, and they always looked smaller. It was the specific leveling that illness did, that no amount of money or power could prevent. She was slim, dark-haired, and right now she was not moving, and her monitor was showing a flat line with the sustained alarm that meant the world was running out of time. The crash team was already there. A nurse was starting compressions. Someone was reaching for the defibrillator. Liam crossed the room. "Hold compressions," he said. The nurse looked up. "Sir?" "Hold them. 10 seconds. I need to see the rhythm." He looked at the monitor. The rhythm, or what passed for one, was there, chaotic and wrong and specific. He turned to Sung, who had come in behind him. "Polymorphic VT, not VF. Look at the morphology. It's torsades." Sung looked at the monitor. Her expression changed. "Torsades de pointes," she said. "The amiodarone triggered it," Liam said. "You need magnesium sulfate, 2 grams IV push, and then isoproterenol to bring the rate up. Do not shock her. A defibrillator shock in torsades can make it worse," Sung finished. She was already moving. 2 grams mag, IV push, now. Do not charge the defibrillator." The confident cardiologist, his name was Reyes, Liam learned later, said from the doorway, "That's not the standard protocol for VT arrest." "It's not standard VT," Liam said. He looked at the nurse at the crash cart. "Magnesium, please." 3 seconds. 5. The magnesium went in. The monitor continued its alarming. The room held its breath. Liam watched the screen. He watched the pattern. He'd been here before. Not in this room. Not with this patient, but in this exact place. The moment where you'd made a call, and there was nothing left to do but wait and see if you were right. He was aware somewhere in the back of his mind that every person in the room was watching him the way they watched something they weren't sure they should trust. He was aware that he was wearing a Carhartt coat, that he'd been fixing a sink 9 hours ago. The monitor showed another beat. Wrong, another, still wrong, and then there. A beat, real, organized, following another, and another. The alarm cut off. The room, collectively, let out a breath that none of them had known they'd been holding. On the bed, Ava Sinclair's chest rose, fell, rose again. Sung was at the monitor, watching the rhythm stabilize beat by beat, her face very controlled and very concentrated. After a long moment, she stepped back. She looked at Liam. He was still watching the monitor. He didn't look back. "Get the isoproterenol ready," he said. "She's going to need it. And call the EP lab. She needs a study as soon as she's stable enough." He pulled off the coat. It was warm in the room, and set it over a chair. "And somebody call down to wherever my daughter is and make sure she has something to eat." Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Dr. Okafor, the resident, said, "I'll call down right now." He nodded, and he turned back to the monitor and kept watching, because the job wasn't done, and the rhythm was still fragile, and Ava Sinclair still had a long way to go. But she was breathing. She was breathing, and that was, for now, enough. Chapter. He found Sophie 40 minutes later in a small family waiting room on the 4th floor, cross-legged on a couch, sketch pad in her lap, 2 granola bar wrappers beside her, and a third one in her hand. A nurse he didn't know was sitting nearby, doing something on her phone, which he suspected meant she'd been asked to keep an eye on Sophie and had decided the best way to do this was to be present without hovering. Sophie looked up when he came in. She read his face the way she'd always read his face, with that uncomfortable accuracy that he'd never managed to fully account for. "She's okay," Sophie said. "She's alive," Liam said. "It's not the same thing yet." Sophie nodded. "Okay." She held up her sketch pad. She'd drawn the lobby from memory. The high ceiling, the elevator bank, the security desk. It wasn't quite right in the proportions, but it was recognizably itself. "That's good," he said. "I'm going to add the revolving door," she said. I can never get revolving doors right. He sat down on the couch beside her. He was tired in the specific way that came after adrenaline. Not sleepy exactly, but hollowed out, like something had burned through him and left the structure intact but emptied. Sophie leaned slightly against his arm, not quite a lean, just a small shift of weight. She did this when she was being careful with him. He'd noticed it years ago and had never said anything about it. Outside the window, Manhattan was doing what Manhattan did, relentless and alive, indifferent to the small, fierce dramas happening inside the buildings it surrounded. Liam looked out at it. He'd come back. He hadn't known, until he walked through those doors, whether he could do this. Whether the thing he'd had, the steadiness, the clarity under pressure, the ability to see what others missed, was still in him after 4 years of sink repairs and house calls in Montana winters. It was still there. He wasn't sure yet how he felt about that. The isoproterenol worked. Not cleanly, not immediately. Nothing about Ava Sinclair's condition was clean or immediate. But by 10:30 that morning, her rhythm had stabilized enough that the EP lab team agreed she was transferable. They moved her in a controlled rush, the kind of hospital movement that looks calm from the outside and isn't at all. And Liam walked beside the gurney because Sung had asked him to, and because, now that he'd started, he found it difficult to stop. She was unconscious, had been since the collapse the day before. Her face, without the performance of wakefulness, was younger than 30, or maybe just more honest. The makeup she'd been wearing on stage had been cleaned off at some point, and what remained was a woman who looked exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the last 24 hours. Like exhaustion had been her baseline for a long time, and illness had simply made it visible. He'd seen that before, in certain kinds of people, the driven ones, the ones who ran companies or departments or entire systems on the fuel of their own intensity. They ran hot, and they ran long, and then something broke, and everyone was surprised, except the people who'd been paying attention. He didn't know anything about Ava Sinclair yet. He'd seen her collapse on a television screen. He'd read a heart monitor. That was the extent of it. But he was going to have to learn more, because the electrophysiology study was going to tell them exactly what they were dealing with, and what they were dealing with was going to require a plan, and the plan was going to require decisions, and decisions were going to require someone who understood the specific architecture of her condition well enough to stand behind them. That someone, apparently, was him. He was still working out how he felt about that. The EP study took 3 hours. Liam wasn't in the lab for all of it. He wasn't credentialed at Meridian, which was a practical problem that Harmon was apparently working to resolve through some combination of administrative speed and whatever institutional goodwill could be mobilized under the circumstances. So he sat in the observation area above the lab and watched through the glass while Sung and her electrophysiology team worked, and he was aware, the entire time, of the slightly unreal quality of it. Being on the other side of the glass, being the observer. He'd spent 11 years being the person in the room, the one with the tools. He'd forgotten, almost entirely, what it was like to watch. Dr. Okafor came and found him midway through. She was the senior resident. Mid-30s, Liam now understood, which meant senior in the real sense, not just in rank. She had the quality of someone who paid attention, which he'd noticed when she'd been the one to find the notation about Ava's father dying during a stress test. She handed him a cup of coffee without asking if he wanted one. He took it. "The study is confirming what you thought," she said. "Brugada pattern? Type 1. Spontaneous." She stood beside him at the glass. "It's rare." "It's very rare," he said, "and it presents like a dozen other things until it doesn't. Most people who have it don't know until something like this." "Yeah." She was quiet for a moment, then, "How did you know? From the footage?" He thought about how to answer that. You ever have a patient who presents with something and something in the history doesn't line up? Not wrong exactly, just the story has a gap in it, and you can't always articulate what the gap is, but you know it's there. Sure, it was like that, the way she fell, the specific sequence of it. He shook his head. "I've only seen that sequence twice, the Hendricks case, and once during residency. Most people who see it once wouldn't connect it. I got lucky that I saw it twice." Okafor looked at him. "I don't think that's luck. Pattern recognition," he said, "which is a function of volume. I had volume once. He took a sip of the coffee. It was better than he expected. You were at Hartwell before, she said. I looked you up this morning. He said nothing. You were publishing regularly, the Hendricks case, 3 other documented cardiac anomalies that became part of the curriculum at... She stopped. I'm sorry, it's fine. I just mean... She paused, choosing. It seems like a waste. That you left. He looked at the glass. Sung was working with a precision and economy of motion that he recognized. The particular efficiency that came from years of doing something specific and difficult until it became second nature. I had reasons, he said. Okafor didn't push. He appreciated that. Sophie, by noon, had exhausted the 4th floor waiting room and made friends with 2 nurses and a hospital chaplain she'd apparently encountered in the elevator. She reported all of this to Liam with the brisk efficiency of someone filing a report. The chaplain's name is Father. No, wait, he's not a priest. He's just a chaplain. His name is Bernard, and he has a dog named Winston, and he showed me pictures. That's great, Bug. He said I'm very mature for my age. He's not wrong. The nurse on the 3rd floor, the one with the braids, her name is Denise, and she said I could come see the supply room if it's okay with you. It's probably not a great time for that. I know. I told her probably later. She was sitting on the couch in the family waiting room, sketchpad balanced on her knees. How's the lady? She's stable. They're doing more tests. Is she going to be okay? I think so. It's still early. Sophie went back to drawing. She was working on the revolving door now, which she'd been struggling with, and she'd shifted her approach back. Instead of trying to draw it in motion, she'd drawn it still, from above, like a diagram. It worked better that way. He looked at it and thought that was actually a reasonable creative problem-solving approach, and that he should not be surprised, because Sophie approached most things that way. Are we staying? She said without looking up. For a while. Is that okay? I have books, she said, which meant yes. Dr. Reyes found Liam in the corridor outside the EP lab at 2 in the afternoon, and the conversation that followed was the kind that Liam had been expecting since he'd walked into the building. He recognized the type because he'd been that type once. Not Reyes specifically, not the same manner, but the underlying dynamic. The experienced physician, the established authority. The person who'd been the answer in the room until someone else arrived and became the answer instead. Carter. Reyes fell into step beside him. He was in his mid-40s, silver, beginning at his temples. The posture of a man who'd been told he was exceptional often enough that he'd integrated it. I want to be clear that I don't have a problem with what happened this morning. Okay, Liam said. I want to be clear that I think you were right and that I was wrong about the amiodarone, and that I can acknowledge that. All right, a beat. That said, Reyes lowered his voice, though the corridor was relatively empty. You're not credentialed here. You've been out of practice for, Harmon said, 3.5 years. In cardiac surgery, that's significant. And there are going to be decisions made about this patient's ongoing care that I won't be making, Liam said. I know. Reyes looked at him. You know. I was brought in for a consult. I gave the consult. What happens next is between Dr. Sung's team and whoever Ava Sinclair's family designates to make decisions while she's incapacitated. He stopped walking and faced Reyes. I'm not here to take over anyone's case. I'm not here to prove anything. I'm here because I know something nobody else in this building happened to know, and because I had the option of not coming and couldn't make myself not come. Reyes looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, Harmon is going to push to get you temporary privileges. I know. Do you want them? Liam thought about the observation room, being on the other side of the glass. I don't know yet. Reyes made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Fair enough, he said, and walked away. Ava Sinclair regained consciousness at 4:17 in the afternoon. Liam wasn't there for it. He was with Sophie in the hospital cafeteria, eating a late lunch that Sophie described as acceptable, when Okafor texted him. He read the message, set down his sandwich, and looked at Sophie. She's awake, he said. Oh, Sophie chewed thoughtfully. Are you going to go see her? Not yet. She'll need time. Her team will need to talk to her first. Explain what happened. Will she be scared? He thought about it, waking up in a hospital after collapsing in front of a room full of people, not knowing what had happened to your heart. Probably, he said. If I woke up like that, I'd want someone to explain everything right away, Sophie said. The whole thing, not just the basic stuff. She'll get the explanation. From you? Eventually, maybe. Sophie picked up her sandwich. You should do it, she said. You're better at explaining things. You've never heard me explain things to a patient. I've heard you explain things to me, she said. And I'm 8, so? Come on. The explanation, when it happened, was not something Liam did alone. Sung led it, which was correct and appropriate. This was her patient, her department, her institution. Liam sat to one side and listened, which was a posture he was getting more comfortable with by increments. Ava Sinclair was sitting up in bed, which said something about her. She'd been unconscious 14 hours and her heart had stopped that morning, and she was sitting up in bed with both hands flat on her thighs, watching Sung with the focused, analytical attention of someone who processed information for a living. She looked different awake, more present. The exhaustion was still there, would be there for a while, but underneath it was something sharp, an intelligence that had clearly been, for her entire adult life, the primary tool she used on the world. Sung explained the Brugada syndrome diagnosis. She explained what had happened, the collapse, the fibrillation, the intervention. She was thorough and clear and used appropriate plain language without condescending, which was harder than it sounded. Ava asked 2 precise questions, listened to the answers, and then her eyes moved to Liam. You're the one from Montana, she said. I am. You figured out what was wrong. It wasn't quite a question. I recognized the pattern, he said. Your team did the work. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't entirely categorize. Richard Harmon told me you drove from Montana, with your daughter. We drove, yes. Why? It was a direct question, delivered without softening. He appreciated that, actually. Because I'd seen this condition before. Because I thought I might be able to help. You could have called. I could have, he agreed. But diagnosis at this level requires seeing the data directly, and your team needed someone in the room, not on the phone. She held his gaze for a moment longer, then she turned back to Sung and asked 3 more questions about the electrophysiology study results, each one demonstrating that she'd absorbed everything from the previous 5 minutes, and was now building on it. Liam watched her and thought that she was, whatever else might be true about her, exceptionally good at taking in information under pressure. He'd seen people get a Brugada diagnosis and cry, or shut down, or deny. She was doing none of those things, which didn't mean she wasn't scared. It just meant she was doing it somewhere that wasn't visible. After Sung finished, Ava asked to rest, and they filed out of the room. In the corridor, Sung turned to Liam. She's going to want to talk to you, she said. I know. Tomorrow, when she's had time. Sure. Sung studied him for a second. She had a way of looking at people that felt like assessment, like she was running a differential on you. You held up all right today, she said. High bar, he said. Something in her face shifted. Almost a smile, not quite. Get some sleep, she said. You look terrible. He'd forgotten what it was like to be in New York and need a place to sleep without having planned for a place to sleep. Montana did not prepare you for the logistical landscape of Manhattan hotels in December, which was a polite way of saying he stood on the sidewalk outside the hospital at 6 p.m. with Sophie's hand in his phone open to a hotel booking app, and a deepening sense that everything in a 10-block radius cost what he made in a month. There's a Holiday Inn, Sophie said, looking at his phone over his arm. That's not a Holiday Inn. It says Holiday Inn. It says Holiday Inn, and it costs $340. Sophie was quiet for a moment, doing the math. That's a lot, she said. That's New York. They ended up at a place 6 blocks away that was technically called a boutique hotel, and practically speaking was a building with narrow hallways and rooms slightly larger than the truck. It cost less than the Holiday Inn thing, and slightly more than he was comfortable with, but it had 2 beds and a functional bathroom and a window that looked out onto a fire escape and beyond it the lights of the city, which Sophie declared was actually really cool. She was asleep by 8:30. The drive had caught up with her. Liam sat in the chair by the window for a long time. He called his clinic, the answering service, technically, because it was after hours, left a message for his office manager, Janet, who was 63 and had been running small-town medical offices since before Liam was born, and who would handle his absence with the competent disapproval of someone who thought he was making a mistake, but would cover for him anyway. Then he sat and looked at the lights and tried to think about nothing, which he wasn't good at. What he kept coming back to wasn't the case. It wasn't the diagnosis or the protocol or the questions that Ava Sinclair had asked with her careful, analytical precision. It was the corridor outside the EP lab that afternoon, and the conversation with Reyes and the specific thing Reyes had said. Do you want them? The temporary privileges. The ability to be officially in that room. Not observing, not consulting informally. In the room. He'd left medicine because staying had become impossible. Not because the skill was gone. Not because the knowledge had dried up. He'd left because the institution, the specific institution, the one where Mara had died, had become something he couldn't stand inside of and remain himself. But Meridian General was not that institution, and Ava Sinclair was not going to be fixed in one day. The Brugada syndrome diagnosis was a beginning, not an end. She was going to need ongoing management, likely an implantable cardioverter defibrillator, definitely a comprehensive evaluation of her long-term risk profile. She was going to need someone who understood the specific mechanics of her specific condition. He knew those mechanics. He was currently one of 6 or 7 physicians in the country who had seen this particular presentation more than once. That was a fact that didn't care how he felt about it. He went to bed at 11, stared at the ceiling for a while, slept badly, which was expected. The next morning, Ava Sinclair was different. Not physically. She was still in the cardiac ICU, still attached to monitors, still in the controlled recovery that followed what her body had been through. But something in her presentation had shifted overnight. The focused, analytical surface was still there, but underneath it, today, there was something rawer. The information had had time to settle, and it had settled hard. She was 30 years old. Her heart had stopped. She had a genetic condition that meant it could stop again. He came in with Sung, who did a morning assessment and then stepped back. And Ava turned to Liam and she said, "Tell me everything." He pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down, which Sung noted with an expression that said she'd expected him to stand, and he said, "Where do you want me to start?" "The beginning. What it is. Why it happened. What it means." So he told her. Not the simplified version, not the managed explanation designed to reduce panic, the real explanation. The electrical architecture of the heart, and where hers deviated from standard, and why that deviation had been invisible until it wasn't. He drew a diagram on the notepad from the bedside table, the kind of rough sketch he used to draw for medical students when he wanted them to understand something structurally rather than just memorize it. She asked questions throughout. Not politely, the way people ask questions when they're trying to seem engaged, genuinely, the way someone asks when they actually need to understand. She caught things he'd said and tested them against each other, looking for inconsistencies, the way a good executive would test a business case. At one point she said, "You said the condition is genetic." "Yes." "My father died at 41. Her voice was even. "During a stress test." "I know." Dr. Okafor found that notation. She was quiet for a moment. Nobody ever put it together. Nobody had reason to look. He wasn't your patient's father. He was an unrelated cardiac event as far as anyone knew. He paused. It's not uncommon for this to go undiagnosed across generations. The genetic component wasn't well understood until the early 2000s. She looked at the window. There wasn't much to see from the window. Just another building, a gray December sky. "I have a brother," she said, 2 years younger. "He should be tested." "Yes." She said it quietly, to herself more than to him, the word landing with a weight that he recognized. The specific weight of a moment when the implications of something become real in a way that comprehension alone doesn't produce. "He should be tested." They sat quietly for a moment. The monitors made their sounds. "Dr. Carter," she said, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be direct with me." "I'll try." "If you hadn't come, if Harmon hadn't reached you, if you'd said no, what would have happened?" He could have softened this, could have offered the version with more uncertainty, more maybe, more possibly. Instead, he said, "The amiodarone would have continued. The rhythm would have deteriorated further. The crash team would have defibrillated, which in torsade de pointe can accelerate the arrhythmia." He paused. "It's hard to say with certainty, but the trajectory was bad." She absorbed this. "So I'd probably be dead." "Probably," he said. "Yes." She nodded, slowly, the way people nod when they're processing something that is too large for a single response. "Thank you," she said, "for coming." "You're welcome." "Why did you say yes? Harmon said you didn't hesitate." "Harmon's being generous." I hesitated. He leaned back in the chair slightly. "But I've been carrying around knowledge of a rare condition for 6 years. I've used it once, in a case that worked out. When something comes along that matches it..." He stopped. "I couldn't say no to that. I've tried saying no to things I shouldn't say no to. It doesn't work for me." She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since he'd sat down, with something more than the analytical processing she'd been running. "You're not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" "Someone trying to impress me," she said. "Everyone tries to impress me. It's exhausting." "I'm not interested in impressing you," he said honestly. "I know." A pause. "That's why I'm talking to you." Word spread. Of course it did. Hospitals were closed systems with extremely porous information, and what had happened in the cardiac ICU at 7:58 the previous morning was not the kind of thing that stayed between the people who'd been in the room. By the second day, Liam had been approached in the corridor by 2 residents, one fellow, and a senior attending who wanted to discuss the Brugada case from 2019. He handled these conversations with what he hoped was appropriate directness. He answered questions when he had answers. He said he didn't know when he didn't know. He did not perform expertise, which was a thing he'd watched people do throughout his career. This performance of certainty, this presentation of command that was as much theater as medicine. What he noticed in these conversations was that people at Meridian General were good. Genuinely, rigorously good. The residents asked smart questions. The attending who wanted to discuss his 2019 case had read it carefully and had a specific follow-up question about the EP mapping that was better than most questions he'd gotten at conferences. It was not a bad institution. He kept coming back to that. Reyes, for all his defensiveness, had acknowledged his error without being pushed hard. Sung ran her department with a precision and intellectual honesty that he'd encountered in maybe a handful of chiefs in his career. Okafor was going to be exceptional in 10 years if she didn't burn herself out first. It was not the institution that had killed Mara. It wasn't even similar to that institution, except in the broad category of large urban hospital. He knew this. He'd known it walking in. And yet he'd been braced for it to be that place. Had been carrying that anticipation into every corridor, every conference room, every exchange with every white coat, looking for the cracks, looking for the places where profit had eroded care, where policy had calcified over judgment. He found something he hadn't expected instead, a place where people were trying, not perfectly. No hospital was perfect, no institution was, but genuinely, with the kind of effort that came from people who'd chosen this work for reasons that had survived contact with reality. On the second evening, Harmon found him in the hallway outside the cardiac ICU and handed him a piece of paper. "Temporary privileges," Harmon said. "The credentialing committee pushed it through this afternoon. Your malpractice coverage is current, which made it possible. You can be in the room officially, as of now." Liam looked at the paper. "That was fast." "Ava Sinclair's legal team called our board chair this morning," Harmon said, with the specific flatness of a man who is not going to editorialize on this fact. "Things moved." "She asked for this?" "She made it known that she had a preference." Harmon paused. "She wants you on her care team for the duration, as a consulting cardiac specialist." Liam folded the paper. "I'm a country doctor," he said. "Dr. Carter." Harmon's voice was dry, not unkind. You are currently the only physician at this institution with a direct clinical experience of the specific presentation this patient had. The designation on the paper is a formality. What you are, in this building right now, is the person who knows what nobody else knows. A pause. That's not nothing. No, Liam said. It's not. He put the paper in his pocket. Yes, sir. Sophie had made herself a project. He discovered this on the third morning when he went to find her in the family waiting room, and she wasn't there. A brief, controlled moment of panic. One of those instinctive parental alarms that fires before rationality can intervene. And then Denise, the nurse with braids who had befriended Sophie on day one, found him in the corridor and said, without preamble, "She's in the pediatric ward. Dr. Okafor took her." She's what? She wanted to draw the kids, Denise said, the ones who've been in a while. Okafor said it was okay because Sophie asked if it was okay first. A pause. She asked about 4 people before she asked Okafor. She's thorough. He went to the pediatric ward on the 3rd floor. The ward had a common area, a room with large windows and low tables and chairs in various colors, and a mural on the wall that someone had painted some years ago with good intentions and declining artistic ability. Sophie was sitting at one of the tables across from a boy of about 9 or 10 who was bald from chemotherapy and wearing a hospital gown, and looking at the sketchpad in Sophie's hands with an expression of careful concentration. Sophie was drawing his portrait. The boy was watching. Liam stood in the doorway and watched them. "Is the nose right?" the boy was saying. Sophie tilted her head. "Sort of. You have a good nose. It's hard to get right." "Nobody ever says that about my nose." "They should. It's a distinctive nose." She erased something, redraws it. "What's your name again?" "Marcus." "Marcus, okay. Don't move for like 2 more minutes." Marcus held very still with the seriousness of someone who had been given a task. Liam watched his daughter draw a portrait of a sick child in a hospital where she'd been brought because he'd needed to come back to something he'd left behind, and he felt something complicated move through him. Pride and grief, and something he didn't have a name for, which was maybe just love in one of its less manageable forms. He left without interrupting. On the 4th day, Reyes stopped being cold. It happened gradually, the way these things happen. Not a single moment of thaw, but a slow accumulation of small ones. He asked Liam a question about the electrophysiology study results in a tone that was requesting information rather than testing him. He acknowledged, in a discussion with Sung and 2 residents, that the amiodarone call had been made on standard protocol grounds, and that the protocol hadn't accounted for this specific presentation. He said "we" instead of "my team" when referencing the ongoing management. After rounds on the 4th morning, he found Liam in the corridor again. "I looked up the Hendricks case more carefully," Reyes said. "Yeah. The documentation you submitted with that case, the proposed modification to the standard Torsades protocol." He paused. "That never made it into the guidelines." "No. Why not?" Liam was quiet for a moment. "I submitted it to the journal. It was accepted. Then I left the field." He said it simply. Nobody followed up. Reyes absorbed this. That protocol modification, if it had been adopted, would have given us a basis for what you called yesterday morning. "Maybe," Liam said. "Possibly." Reyes looked at him with something that had graduated from assessment to something more like recognition. "You should have stayed," he said. It wasn't unkind. It was just honest. "I know," Liam said, and then, because it was also honest, "I know." On the 5th day, Ava Sinclair asked about his wife. Not directly. She was too precise for that. She didn't ask things obliquely when she could ask them directly. And she didn't ask things she didn't want the answer to. They'd been talking about the ICD, the implantable cardioverter defibrillator that Sung's team was planning to implant. The device that would monitor her heart's rhythm and intervene if it went wrong again. A small device. A significant intervention. She was quiet after they finished talking about it, and then she said, "Harmon told me you left medicine after losing your wife." "Harmon talks a lot," Liam said. "He was trying to explain why I should trust you." A pause. He thought the context would help. Did it? It helped me understand why you left, she said. It didn't help me understand why you came back. He looked at her. I didn't exactly come back. I came for a specific case. And now you have temporary privileges and you've been here 5 days. He said nothing. You miss it, she said. He looked at the window. That's not simple. I didn't say it was simple. She adjusted her position in the bed. She'd been sitting up for longer periods each day, which was good. I run a company. I've had to walk away from things I was good at sometimes because other things required it. And I know what it looks like when someone misses something they were good at. It looks like you. You've known me 5 days. I'm a fast reader, she said. He thought about Montana, the quiet, Sophie in her fox pajamas, the broken sink, which was still broken, which Janet had texted him about twice. He thought about the observation room above the EP lab, being on the wrong side of the glass. He thought about standing in Ava Sinclair's room and knowing what was wrong when 7 other cardiologists hadn't known. I miss the knowing, he said finally. The part where you see something nobody else sees and you know what it means. He paused. I don't miss everything that came with it. She nodded slowly, like she understood. Like that distinction made sense to her in terms of her own life. The thing that came with it, she said. Your wife. Indirectly, he said. Yeah. What happened? He thought about whether to answer this. He'd spent 3.5 years not answering this question, or answering it as briefly as possible, or redirecting. But she'd asked it directly, and she'd told him she wanted directness. And there was something about the way she asked it, not curious, not probing, but careful, the way you handle something you recognize as fragile, that made him say the truth. He told her about the drug protocol, the approval process, the 36 hours. He told it briefly, without editorializing, in the same flat way he'd told her that she probably would have died if he hadn't come. Just facts. Just what happened. When he finished, the room was quiet. Ava's expression during the telling had changed. Not dramatically. She wasn't a dramatic person in that sense, but something had moved beneath the surface of it, some specific recalibration that he didn't fully understand. What was the hospital? She said. Hartwell Medical Center, he said. In Manhattan. She said nothing for a long moment. Then she said very carefully, I know Hartwell. He looked at her. Something in her voice had changed. Something had gone tighter. A lot of people know Hartwell, he said. I know it specifically, she said. Ben Syntec, my company. She stopped. Stopped for a few seconds in the particular way people stop when they're catching up to something they need to say. Syntec provided the pharmaceutical management software that Hartwell implemented in 2019. The system that processed approval requests for certain drug categories. She paused. The approval workflow. He was very still. Our software, she said. The delay system. The 3-tier approval for high-cost pharmaceuticals. She was watching him with an expression that had gone somewhere he couldn't read. We designed that system for them. We implemented it. Liam. She'd used his name for the first time. The monitors made their sounds. Outside, somewhere in the hospital's vast machinery, people were moving, working, doing the continuous labor of a place that didn't stop. He sat in the chair beside her bed and looked at the floor and said nothing because there was nothing to say yet. The information had arrived, and it needed time to be real. The way all information needs time to be real, the big kind, the kind that reorganizes things. Ava Sinclair's company had built the system that had killed Mara. She'd been conscious for 5 days. She'd asked him to explain everything. She'd said thank you for coming, and now she was looking at him with an expression that was not quite guilt, was something larger than guilt, something that didn't have a clean name. And he was sitting in a chair in a hospital room in Manhattan with a piece of paper in his pocket that said he had temporary privileges and a daughter 3 floors below him drawing portraits of sick children. He breathed, in, out, the way you breathe when you need to stay in the room. I didn't know, Ava said. I need you to know that I didn't know. I know, he said. He didn't know yet if he believed it, but he said it because it was the only thing to say, and because the conversation was not over, was far, far from over, and because walking out of the room right now would be the wrong thing to do, and he was trying, most days, to do the right thing. He sat in the chair. He stayed in the room. The silence in that room lasted longer than it should have. Not an uncomfortable silence, something heavier than that. The kind that happens when two people are both holding something and neither of them quite knows how to set it down. The monitors kept their rhythm. The city beyond the window kept its noise. And Liam sat in the chair beside Ava Sinclair's bed, with the information settling into him the way cold settles into a building. Not all at once, but finding every gap, every place where the insulation had worn thin. Syntex software. The approval workflow. 3 tiers of authorization for high-cost pharmaceuticals. He'd spent 3.5 years angry at an institution, at a system, at the abstract, faceless machinery of a hospital that had made a policy decision and buried his wife in its collateral damage. He'd never had a specific name to put on the software. He'd never had a face. Now he did. She was 30 years old, and her heart had stopped 5 days ago, and she was looking at him with the particular expression of someone who has just understood that the floor they thought was solid has a different quality than they believed. "Dr. Carter," she said. She'd gone back to Dr. Carter. He noticed. "I need to understand something. Was there a lawsuit?" "Yes," he said, "against Hartwell." "Against Hartwell. Settled out of court 18 months after she died. Non-disclosure as part of the settlement." He paused. "Which means I can't discuss the specifics of what was settled. But I can tell you that Syntec was not named in the litigation. Because nobody knew the software was the mechanism. Because nobody connected it," he said. "The policy was Hartwell's policy. Your software executed it. The responsibility, legally, sat with the institution that implemented it." Ava was quiet. She had the quality of someone running a calculation. Multiple variables, multiple threads. The kind of simultaneous processing that either came naturally or didn't. "But operationally," she said, "the delay wasn't a physician's decision. It wasn't a nurse's decision. It was the system routing the request." "Yes?" "Our system." "Yes." She closed her eyes. Not dramatically. She closed them the way you close your eyes when you need to think without the input of what you're seeing. When she opened them again, her face had gone to a place he recognized from the mirror, from the years after Mara, from the specific geography of a person confronting something that cannot be unfaced. "I was 26 when we built that system," she said. "I inherited the medical records division from my father after he died, and I spent 2 years trying to prove I could run it. That system, the approval workflow, was designed to reduce pharmaceutical overhead for hospital clients. It was a cost management tool." A pause. "We sold it as efficiency. We called it streamlining." She said the word like it had gone bad. "I signed the Hartwell contract personally." Liam said nothing. "I didn't think about what happens at the end of a delay," she said. "I thought about the approval rate. I thought about the quarterly numbers. I thought about—" She stopped. "I didn't think about what happens at the end of a delay." He looked at her. He'd prepared somewhere in the back of his mind for this conversation to make him angry. He'd expected it to surface something he'd worked hard to contain, the rage that had been there in the first year after Mara, that had driven him out of medicine and into Montana and into a life that was smaller and quieter than the one he'd had. He'd expected to need to manage himself. What he felt instead was something more complicated and less useful than rage. He felt tired. Very simply, deeply tired. Not from the week, not from the drive, but from the years, from the specific weight of carrying something this long. "I'm going to need some time," he said. "Of course." "Not—" He shook his head. "I'm not leaving. I mean, I need time with this information." He looked at the window. "I've been angry at a hospital for 3.5 years. What you've just told me doesn't change what happened. It changes the map of it. Those are different things." She watched him with careful eyes. "Is there anything I can say?" "Not right now," he said. "No." He stood up. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. He was almost at the door when she said his name. His actual name, not the title. "Liam." He turned. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know that's not enough. I know it doesn't—" It doesn't reach what it needs to reach. But I am. He stood in the doorway for a moment. He looked at her, at this woman in a hospital bed, recovering from a stopped heart, carrying a genetic condition that would shadow her for the rest of her life, and now carrying this other thing on top of it. This revelation that the business she'd built had a consequence she hadn't seen. I know you are, he said. He went out into the corridor. He walked. That was what he did. Just walked through the hospital corridors, past the nurse's station on the 8th floor, to the elevator, down to the lobby, and then out onto the sidewalk into the December cold without his jacket properly on. He stood on the pavement and let the cold be cold. New York moved around him. People with purpose, people in transit, a food delivery cyclist cutting between a cab and a bus with the kind of confidence that was either skill or delusion. A woman talking on her phone in a language he didn't recognize. A man in a Mets hat eating a pretzel without apparent enjoyment, purely as a functional act. He thought about Mara. Not the way he usually thought about her, which was in fragments, in the specific textures of small memories that surfaced without pattern, her laugh or her handwriting or the way she'd narrated cooking instructions aloud to herself like a radio host nobody was listening to. He thought about her in the wider sense, the full fact of her, who she'd been and what she'd done and what had been lost when she died, and what that loss had cost Sophie, and what it had cost him, and what it had cost the people she'd have taken care of if she'd lived, all the patients who'd passed through a pediatric ward where she would have been and wasn't. He'd been angry at Hartwell for so long that the anger had become like a piece of furniture, part of the room he lived in. You stopped really seeing it because it was always there. Now he had to figure out what to do with the information that there had been a second address for that anger, one he'd never known about. A text from Sophie. Dad, where are you? Denise said you left the floor. He typed back, outside, getting some air. I'm okay. 3 dots appeared. Then, Marcus drew me a portrait back. It's bad, but in a sweet way. He almost laughed. He typed, I'll be back in a few minutes. He stood on the pavement a little longer. Then he went back inside. He found Okafor in the resident's workroom on the 6th floor, which was where she seemed to live. He'd looked for her in various locations over the past 5 days, and she was almost always there, surrounded by charts and half-empty coffee cups and the organized chaos of someone doing 4 things at once. She looked up when he came in. Dr. Carter. Did you know? He said. He kept his voice level. About Syntech and Hartwell. The software. She looked at him steadily. No, I didn't know. I put together this morning, after Ava told me she told you, that the timeline aligned with your wife's case, but I didn't know before. He believed her. Who else in this building knows? Harmon didn't know. Ava called her VP of Legal this morning from her room. Whatever happened in that conversation, I don't know the details. She paused. She's moving fast. She moves fast, he said. He said it without inflection. How are you doing? Okafor asked. I don't know yet. She nodded. She didn't offer platitudes, which he was grateful for. She had the quality of someone who understood that some questions were rhetorical and some weren't, and the skill was in telling the difference. She asked to see the original contract documentation, Okafor said, for the Hartwell implementation. She asked her team to pull everything, implementation records, approval workflow specifications, incident reports from the Hartwell period. She paused. She's not running from it. He sat down in one of the empty chairs. She's 30 years old, he said. She built something that made money and didn't think about what was at the end of the delay. No. And now she has to think about it. Yes. He looked at the ceiling. I don't know what that is. I don't know how I'm supposed to feel about that. I don't think there's a supposed to, Okafor said. People keep telling me things that are true but not useful, he said. She almost smiled. Sorry. Don't be. He rubbed his face. He needed sleep that he hadn't been getting. She's going to need the ICD implant scheduled. Sung wants to do it tomorrow morning if she's stable overnight. She'll be stable. He stopped. She's stubborn, in the way that keeps you alive. Okafor looked at him. You're going to be in the room, she said. It wasn't quite a question. I'm going to be in the room, he said. Come. Sophie, when he found her, was in the pediatric common room, now not only drawing, but having apparently organized a small and unofficial art session involving Marcus, a 12-year-old girl named Priya who had been there 3 weeks, and a 7-year-old with a cast on his arm who Sophie had introduced to the concept of one-handed drawing with the cheerful pragmatism of someone who found obstacles interesting rather than discouraging. Liam stood in the doorway and watched the 4 of them around the table with their paper and pencils, and Sophie explaining something about shading with the seriousness of a person who'd been doing this for years, which in relative terms she had. Denise appeared at his elbow. "She's been in here for 2 hours," she said quietly. "I checked on them every 20 minutes. I hope that's—" "It's fine," Liam said. "It's good. Marcus hasn't left that table since she came back. He's usually pretty withdrawn." A pause. "He's been in here 11 weeks. Liam watched his daughter show the 7-year-old, his name was apparently Theo, she kept saying, "Okay, Theo, look, how to hold the pencil differently." Theo was focused with the intensity of a small person who had decided this mattered. "She's a good kid," Denise said. "She is," Liam said. He felt something press at the back of his chest. "She really is." He sat with Sophie in the family waiting room that evening and told her some of what had happened. Not all of it. She was 8, and some of it he hadn't processed well enough himself to transmit to anyone else. But enough. He told her that the company run by the woman he'd been treating had been connected, in a way nobody had known, to what had happened to her mother. Sophie listened the way she listened to everything important, without interrupting, watching his face. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Are you mad?" she said. "I don't know what I am," he said. "Honestly." "That's okay." She picked at a thread on her sleeve. "Are you going to stop helping her?" "No." "Why not?" He thought about how to explain it in terms that were both true and not beyond an 8-year-old's framework. "Because what happened to your mom was caused by a system, a decision that a lot of people were part of. Ava was one of those people, and she didn't know what she was part of." He paused. "She knows now. And what she does with that matters more than the fact that she didn't know then." Sophie considered this. Like how if you accidentally hurt someone, the important thing is what you do after. Exactly like that. She nodded. "Okay," she said, with a finality that meant she'd processed it and filed it and was ready to move on. He sometimes envied her that capacity. Sometimes it unsettled him, her willingness to resolve things cleanly. He wasn't sure if it was resilience or just youth, and he suspected he'd spend the next decade finding out. "Marcus is coming along," she said, "with the shading. He was scared of making mistakes, so he was pressing too hard. But I told him the mistakes are how you know where to go next." He looked at her. "Where'd you hear that?" She looked back at him with the expression of a person who cannot believe they have to explain something this obvious. "From you," she said. "You tell me that all the time." "I say that about medicine," he said. "Same thing," she said, and went back to her sketchpad. The ICD implant was scheduled for 9 in the morning. Liam was in the surgical prep area by 7:30, which was excessive by any reasonable standard. But the alternative was lying in the 2 small hotel rooms staring at the ceiling while Sophie slept, and he'd already done that for 2 hours before giving up. He scrubbed in at 8:45. Sung was already in the room, reviewing the imaging one more time. She had the quality of a surgeon who never stopped reviewing, who trusted preparation the way some people trusted talent, and understood that preparation was just practice trust. Reyes was there too. They'd reached a kind of equilibrium over the past 5 days. Not warmth exactly, but a functional respect that didn't require conversation to be operative. Reyes nodded when Liam came in. Liam nodded back. Okafor was circulating. She moved through the room with an efficiency that said she'd been doing this long enough that it was automatic, freeing her mind for the parts that weren't. The procedure was not the most complex surgery Liam had ever been in a room for. Catheter-based ICD implant. 2 to 3 hours under normal circumstances, longer if the lead placement required adjustment, which it sometimes did. The surgery itself wasn't the hard part. The hard part was everything that had led to it and everything that would come after, which was true of most hard things. When Ava came in, wheeled in, sedated, but not yet under. That particular twilight state of pre-general anesthesia where consciousness still has its lights on, but they're dimming. Her eyes found Liam almost immediately. He was standing to the side, not at the table yet, and she looked at him with the focused residue of a person trying to communicate something before the lights went out entirely. He stepped closer. "I'm pulling the Hartwell contract records," she said. Her voice was slow, the edges softened by the sedation. "Everything. When I'm out of this, we'll talk about it when you're out of this," he said. "I need you to know I'm not—" She stopped, gathered. "I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen." "I know," he said. "Okay." She looked at the ceiling. "Okay?" The anesthesiologist completed the induction. The lights went out. The room shifted into the particular focused mode that surgical rooms shift into when the work begins. Voices quieter, movements more deliberate. The world outside the room becoming irrelevant. Liam moved to his position and did what he'd done every day for 11 years before he'd stopped. He paid attention. But 3 hours and 17 minutes. The lead placement required adjustment once. The first position showed marginal sensing, and Sung made the call to reposition with a precision and lack of drama that Liam appreciated. The second position was clean. The device was tested, the thresholds confirmed, the wound closed. 3 hours and 17 minutes, and Ava Sinclair had a device in her chest that would, if her heart made the wrong electrical decision again, make the right one for it. In the recovery room, when she surfaced from the anesthesia, she was disoriented for about 4 minutes, and then she wasn't. Liam sat in a chair across the room and watched Okafor do the recovery assessment, and he thought about the specific strange symmetry of the week, how he'd come here as a consultant and was now, officially and practically, something more than that, and how he felt about that was still not a thing he could articulate cleanly. He'd been in a hospital for a week. He hadn't wanted to be in a hospital for 3.5 years. And the honest truth, the one that he turned over in his mind with the care of something fragile, was that it wasn't as bad as he'd believed it would be. Not because the fear had been wrong. The fear had been correct, as a prediction of what the first hours would feel like. Walking in, the smell, the sounds, the specific emotional geography of a place that had taken something from him. But fear, he was relearning, and the actual experience of the thing you feared were different countries. You could know intellectually that they were different and still be surprised when you arrived. He was surprised. When Ava was coherent enough to have a real conversation, mid-afternoon, propped up in the recovery room with her color returning and her analytical mind clearly already working at half speed and climbing, she said, "Tell me about your wife." "We've been through this," he said. "I mean, tell me about her as a person. Not the case, not the medical stuff." A pause. What was she like? He hadn't been expecting that. He sat with it for a moment. "Funny," he said. "Genuinely funny. Not the kind where you have to be there, the kind that held up. She used to do this thing where she narrated cooking out loud to herself like a radio show, even when I was standing right there, completely ignored the audience." He paused. She was a pediatric nurse. She was good at it, not just technically. She had the thing where kids just trusted her immediately. You'd think it was a skill, but it wasn't really a skill. It was just her. Ava was listening carefully. "She was impatient," he said, "with inefficiency, with bureaucracy, with people who talked around things instead of at them. She had no patience for, she called it decorative communication, where you say a lot of words and don't say anything." He stopped. "Sophie has that same thing, that impatience with nonsense." "Sophie's remarkable," Ava said. "She's the best thing I've done," he said. "And I didn't even do it, really. She showed up like that. I'm mostly trying to keep up." Ava looked at the window. "My mother died when I was 12, she said. Car accident. So I grew up with my father, who was a brilliant engineer and a functional disaster as a parent. And I learned very early that if I wanted something done, I had to do it myself. And if I wanted something felt, I had to feel it by myself because there wasn't anyone to share it with." She said it without self-pity, as pure information. "It made me very efficient and not great at relationships." "You're 30, he said. "I know. I keep telling myself I'll work on it later." A pause. Later has a new meaning this week. He nodded. He understood that. The way a brush with death, any brush for any reason, reorganized the timeline, made certain things that had been abstract become concrete. What are you going to do with the Hartwell information? He said. He needed to know. Not for himself, or not only for himself, because the answer would tell him something about who she actually was, and who she actually was mattered now in a way it hadn't mattered 6 days ago. She'd clearly been thinking about this. He could see it in the particular quality of her answer, not spontaneous, constructed, built from actual thinking. I'm going to have independent legal counsel audit the full implementation of that system at every client hospital, she said. Hartwell wasn't the only one. We sold that workflow package to 11 hospital systems. She paused on that number. Let it sit. I need to know if there were other Maras. The words landed hard. He hadn't expected her to say Mara's name. He wasn't sure if he was grateful for it or not. And then, he said, and then I'm going to publish the findings, internal and external. I'm going to remove the system from every facility that still uses it. I'm going to restructure the way SynTech evaluates clinical impact before implementation, not just technical efficacy, not just cost metrics. She paused. And I'm going to set aside funding for whatever compensation process the legal team determines is appropriate for affected families. That will be expensive, huh? He said. Yes. And public. Yes. Your board won't. My board, she said, with a particular edge that he hadn't heard from her before, will understand that the alternative is for this to come out in a way I don't control, which will be more expensive and worse. She paused. And also, it's the right thing to do, which I'm learning to factor in before the business case, rather than after. He looked at her. She looked back at him. I believe you, he said. I'm not sure you should yet, she said. I haven't done it yet. Believing it at this stage is just trusting my stated intentions. It's a start, he said. She almost smiled. It's a start, she agreed. That night, Liam called Janet at the clinic. She answered on the second ring, which meant she'd been expecting the call, which meant she'd been managing things in her competent and disapproving way and had reached the point where she wanted to report. Dr. Carter, she said. Janet. You've been gone a week. I know. Mr. Peterson rescheduled. The Nguyen family is going to drive to Missoula if you're not back by Friday. And I've had 4 calls from people who want to know if you're coming back at all, which I told them was a strange question given that you've been gone a week. But I understood the concern because you left very fast. I'm coming back, he said. A pause. Are you sure? Yes? Because... She stopped. She'd been his office manager for 3 years, and she understood what was not said better than most people understood what was. You sound different. I'm tired. Not that kind of different. She was quiet for a moment. Are you okay? I'm working on it, he said, which was an honest answer and not a particularly satisfying one, and Janet deserved better, but it was what he had. The sink is still broken, she said. I sent Tommy Breslin over to look at it, and he says it needs a new coupling, and he'll be back Thursday if you're there to let him in. I'll be there, he said. All right. She sounded slightly less disapproving, slightly. How's Sophie? She's running an art program on the pediatric ward, he said. A long pause. Of course she is, Janet said, and he could hear in her voice the complicated, fond exasperation that most people who knew Sophie eventually arrived at. I'll hold off the Nguyens until Monday. Thank you, Janet. Don't thank me, just come back. He hung up. He was sitting in the hotel room. Sophie was asleep again, and the city was doing its nighttime version of itself outside the window. The lights denser now, the noise a different register, the ceaseless particular energy of a place that had decided sleep was optional. He thought about Montana, the highway in the early morning, dark and flat and empty. The clinic with its 2 examination rooms and its waiting area with the fish tank that had 3 fish in it and should probably have more, but he'd never gotten around to it. The house with the broken sink and the cracked windshield and the way the cold came through the gap at the bottom of the back door that he also kept meaning to fix. He thought about the observation room above the EP lab, and the piece of paper in his jacket that said he had temporary privileges, and Reyes saying you should have stayed in the flat, honest way of someone delivering a fact they didn't enjoy. He thought about Ava Sinclair, 5 floors above him in this moment, with a device in her chest and a weight newly added to the one she already carried, lying in a hospital bed running calculations on how to fix something that had been broken for years, and that she hadn't known was broken until a man from Montana showed up in a Carhartt coat and told her what had happened to his wife. He was going back to Montana. That was true and fixed and not negotiable. Sophie had school, he had patience, Janet would lose whatever patience remained if he stretched this further. But going back was not the same thing as what he'd done 3.5 years ago, when going back had meant retreat, had meant choosing smallness as a form of protection. He wasn't sure yet what it meant this time. He was working on finding out. Ava was moved out of the cardiac ICU on day 8, a private room on the 7th floor, which was quieter, which had a window with a better view, the kind of Manhattan view that made you understand why people paid what they paid to live here, all the particular accumulated light of a city that didn't believe in dark. She was walking laps of the corridor by the second day in the new room, supervised, slow, the deliberate progress of someone who'd always been in motion and was learning to be in motion again at a different pace. Liam walked with her sometimes. Not every time. He wasn't her only doctor, and she had a team, and his privileges, however temporally granted, were not a license to be everywhere. But sometimes. On one of these walks, she said, "I called my brother." "Daniel?" "Yeah." She'd mentioned him again in pieces over the course of their conversations. 2 years younger, worked in tech outside Chicago, had always been the quieter one in the family, the one who'd stepped back when she'd stepped forward. "I told him about the diagnosis, the genetic component. He needs to be tested." "He understood?" "He was scared," she said, "which is reasonable. He has a wife and a 4-year-old. She was walking at a careful pace, one hand not quite at the wall but close enough to be there if needed. I realized, when I was talking to him, that I'd never called him just to talk, in the last 2 years. She said it matter-of-factly, not with guilt, but with the clear-eyed accounting of someone reviewing a ledger. "He's my brother, and I called him to deliver medical information, and then I ran out of other things to say." "He'll come around," Liam said. "He already has. He's flying in tomorrow." She paused. "He said he'd been waiting for me to need something." Liam thought about that, about what it meant to have someone who'd been waiting, and to have been so certain you didn't need anything that you'd never given them the chance. "Mara used to say that about me," he said, "that I was the kind of person who waited to be needed and then showed up fully and completely, but that the daily maintenance of—" She said I didn't know how to just be present, without a purpose. "That sounds familiar," Ava said. "She wasn't wrong," he said. "I think about that. What changed?" He thought about Sophie, about the particular discipline of raising a child alone, the way it required presence, not when things were wrong, not when someone needed you, but on Tuesday afternoons when nothing was happening and you were just there, just available. "Having Sophie alone taught me that presence doesn't need a purpose," he said. "It took a few years." She walked another lap in silence. When they turned at the end of the corridor and started back, she said, "How does someone learn to do that if there's no external force requiring it?" "I don't know," he said honestly. "I think you just have to decide that the maintenance matters, that the ordinary moments are the thing, not the dramatic ones." She was quiet. He could see her thinking, could see the information arriving and being sorted, the way information arrived and was sorted with her, with that particular velocity. "I've only ever been good at the dramatic moments," she said. "You'll learn," he said. "You sound confident." "You stopped your own heart learning something hard," he said. "I think you'll figure out Tuesday afternoons." She made a sound, not quite a laugh, but related to one. "That's either the most encouraging thing anyone said to me this week, or the most specific." "Maybe both," he said. He had the conversation with Harmon on day 9. He'd known it was coming. Harmon had the quality of a man who let things develop to a certain point and then addressed them directly, which Liam respected, and the certain point had apparently been reached. They sat in Harmon's office, which was on the fifth floor, and had the organized solemnity of a room belonging to someone who'd been in institutional medicine long enough to have opinions about furniture. Harmon poured 2 cups of coffee from a machine that appeared to cost more than Liam's truck, which said something about priorities. "I'll be direct," Harmon said. "Please." "Sung wants you on the cardiac team, permanently." He held up a hand. "Not as a hire. She knows you have a practice in Montana, and she's not suggesting you move. She's suggesting a formal consulting relationship, a named senior consulting cardiologist, contracted, a certain number of weeks per year in Manhattan, access to complex cases as they arise, telehealth involvement in ongoing management." He paused. "With specific provisions for the Sinclair case, which is going to require long-term follow-up." Liam looked at his coffee. "That's not a small thing you're describing," he said. "No," Harmon said. "It isn't. My practice is in Montana. I have patients." "I know. The structure is specifically designed to accommodate that. We're not asking you to leave." Harmon looked at him steadily. "We're asking you to not leave so completely this time." Liam was quiet for a moment. "That's a pointed way to put it." "I'm told you prefer directness." He thought about the observation room, the wrong side of the glass, the piece of paper in his jacket that had started as temporary and was being asked to become something else. He thought about what Okafor had said. "You held up all right today." He thought about Reyes, the way their relationship had shifted from defensive to functional to something approaching collegial over the course of a week. He thought about Sung reviewing imaging at 8 in the morning with the focused intensity of someone who'd never stopped caring about getting it right. He thought about the knowledge he carried, the specific, narrow, hard-won knowledge of a condition rare enough that 6 years had passed between his 2 encounters with it, and the certainty that there would be others. That somewhere in the country, on some future morning, someone with an undiagnosed electrical abnormality in their heart would present to an ER, and whether someone in the room had read his case documentation might be the difference between a difficult day and a tragedy. He'd spent 3.5 years keeping that knowledge in a room in Montana, being careful with it, not using it. He was tired of being careful with it. "I'd need to talk to Sophie," he said. "Of course. And I'd need provisions for her schooling on the weeks I'm here. She'd come with me." Harmon didn't blink. "We can facilitate that. And I need to go back to Montana first. There are patients and a sink that needs fixing. Naturally. And I'm not—" He stopped. "I'm not leaving my practice. Not again. Completely. The people in that town need a doctor, and I'm the doctor they have." "Understood," Harmon said. "That's not what's being asked." Liam picked up his coffee, drank some of it, set it back down. "I'll think about it," he said. Harmon nodded. He appeared unsurprised. "That's all I'm asking." Hamon. On the last morning, day 10, he went to see Ava one more time before he and Sophie left. She was sitting up in the chair by the window, not the bed. She'd been insisting on the chair for 2 days, which the nursing staff had noted in her chart with the specific notation of people recording a patient preference that they found slightly exasperating and entirely unsurprising. She was wearing her own clothes for the first time, dark pants, a simple top, and she had her phone in her hand and looked from the doorway like someone who was already partially back in her life even though she wasn't yet cleared to go there. "You're leaving today," she said. "Sophie has school." She nodded. Her brother Daniel had been in the previous evening. Liam had passed him in the corridor, a quieter version of Ava's intensity, with his father's eyes according to things she'd said, who had looked at Liam with the expression of someone who wasn't sure how to thank a stranger for the specific thing he'd done. Liam had shaken his hand and said nothing, because there wasn't anything to say. "I've started the audit," Ava said. 3 outside firms, independent, no conflicts with Syntec. She said it with the particular satisfaction of someone who'd made decisions while they were supposed to be recovering from surgery, which she clearly had. "The Hartwell implementation records are being preserved separately from any ongoing business operations. My legal team knows this is not a business-first situation." "Good," he said. "It's going to take months," she said. "The full picture. And when the picture is complete, I want to tell you what we find." She paused. "Specifically. Not through lawyers or press releases. I want to tell you." He nodded. "And if we find other families," she said, and stopped. The sentence sat there, incomplete, because completing it required a vocabulary she was still developing for this. If you find other families, he said, you help them. Yes. She looked at him. How are you doing with all of it? I'm somewhere between angry and something else that doesn't have a name yet, he said. That's honest. You said you wanted direct. I did. She was quiet for a moment. For what it's worth, what I told you in there, the first day, about not knowing. That was true. I believe you, he said, and this time he meant it the way you mean something when you've had more time with it. When it's moved from possible to probable to something you've checked against what you know of a person and decided holds up. She looked at the window, at the city doing its city thing outside the glass. I keep thinking about what you said, that you couldn't say no because you've been carrying this knowledge and couldn't make yourself not use it. Yeah. I think I've been carrying something the opposite of that, she said. I've been carrying the ability to change things, real systemic things, the scale of what SynTech touches, the number of hospitals, the reach, and I've been using it mostly in the direction of profit because that's the direction I was trained to use it in. She paused. I don't think that's the only direction it goes. He looked at her. No, he said. I don't think it is. She turned from the window and looked at him with the focused, clear-eyed quality he'd come to recognize over 10 days as simply the way she was, the machinery of her mind visible through the expression on her face. When you come back, she said, and I hope you come back, I have an idea I want to talk to you about. I haven't said I'm coming back. I know, she said, but you haven't said you're not. He stood in the doorway of her hospital room for a moment. He'd stood in a lot of doorways over the past 10 days. This was the thing about hospitals, the constant threshold crossing, the rooms you entered and left. Get some rest, he said. Actually rest, not chair-sitting with your phone. I'll try, she said, in the tone of someone who had no intention of trying. He almost smiled. He left. Assad. Sophie said goodbye to Marcus with the pragmatic warmth of a person who understood that goodbyes were a type of thing that happened and that the appropriate response was clear-eyed acknowledgement and not excessive sentiment. She gave him the portrait she'd drawn of him. He gave her the portrait he'd drawn of her, which was bad in exactly the sweet way she'd said it would be, and which she carefully put in the front pocket of her backpack with the care of something valuable. You can write, Sophie told him. My dad can give you the address. I'm not great at writing, Marcus said. That's fine. You can draw instead. She adjusted her backpack straps. You're getting better. You just have to stop being scared of the mistakes. Marcus looked at her. He was 9 years old and had been in this hospital for 11 weeks, and he'd spent most of it behind walls of quiet, and a girl with a sketch pad had come in and drawn his portrait and told him his nose was distinctive, and now she was leaving. Okay, he said. Okay, she said, and turned and walked back to her father. And that was that. Liam took the address from Okafor, Wat, his personal email, not the hospital's, and wrote it on a piece of paper that Marcus folded and put in the pocket of his hospital gown, with the careful precision of something he wasn't going to lose. Okafor walked them to the elevator. You'll consider Harmon's proposal, she said. Not a question. I said I'd think about it. I know what you said. She pressed the elevator button. We need people who know things, she said. Not just people who are good. People who know the specific things that save the specific lives. She looked at him. You know things. You're going to be one of those people, he said. She looked mildly surprised. Thank you. It's not a compliment. It's a prediction. The elevator arrived. He put his hand on Sophie's back and walked her in. 10 years, maybe 8, if you sleep less. The doors began to close. Get a better coffee machine for the residence room, he said through the gap. The one you have is terrible. He thought he heard her laugh as the doors shut. Sophie looked up at him. Ready? Ready, he said. The elevator descended. In his jacket pocket, the piece of paper with temporary privileges printed across the top sat next to his phone and his wallet and the address of a 9-year-old boy named Marcus who was getting better at drawing, slowly, one mistake at a time. The doors opened to the lobby. Liam Carter and his daughter walked out into the December cold, toward the parking structure and the truck and the long road home. The drive home took longer than the drive out. Not because of weather, though the weather was there. A low-pressure system moving east that gave them gray skies through Ohio and Indiana, and the particular flat white light of a December afternoon that made everything look slightly provisional, like the world hadn't committed to anything. The extra time was geography and stops, and the specific fatigue of a return journey, which is always different from the outward one. Going out, you move toward something. Coming back, you move through what you now know. Sophie slept through most of Illinois. Liam drove and listened to a country station out of somewhere he couldn't identify and tried not to organize his thoughts, which meant he organized his thoughts. He thought about Harmon's offer. He turned it over the way he turned over diagnostic puzzles, not trying to solve it immediately, but letting it rotate, seeing what it looked like from different angles. A formal consulting relationship. A named position. Weeks in New York, weeks in Montana, the kind of split life that required you to hold two versions of yourself simultaneously and trust that they were still the same person. He thought about what Reyes had said. You should have stayed. He thought about Okafor and the way she'd handed him coffee without asking, and the fact that she'd been right about every professional read she'd made in 10 days, which was not nothing. He thought about Sung, who'd wanted him in the room and had then let him be in the room without managing him, which was a specific and valuable thing. He thought about Ava. He thought about the audit she'd launched, the 3 independent firms, the preserved records, the legal team being directed away from business-first thinking. He thought about her saying, if we find other families, and stopping, because the sentence required a kind of reckoning she was building toward and wasn't quite at yet. He thought about the Mara-shaped gap in all of it, the central absence that everything else arranged itself around. And he thought about what he'd told Sophie in the family waiting room, that what a person did after they understood something mattered more than the fact that they hadn't understood it before. He believed that. He'd meant it when he said it. Believing it and feeling it were still, he was finding 2 slightly different countries. He was somewhere in the territory between them, on a highway in Illinois, in a truck with 214,000 miles on it, with his daughter asleep in the passenger seat. He drove. They got home on a Friday afternoon, 4 in the weather, the sky over Montana doing its specific winter thing, vast and gray and personal, the way Montana's sky was always personal, like it was aware of you specifically and had opinions. The house was cold. He'd left the heat on low, which was enough to keep the pipes, but not enough to be comfortable, and it took 20 minutes for the furnace to bring the rooms up to livable. Sophie walked through it like an inventory check. Her bedroom, the living room, the kitchen, the bathroom, and declared it exactly the same, which it was, and which appeared to satisfy something she'd needed to verify. Tommy Breslin had come about the sink. There was a note on the kitchen counter, fix the coupling. Also, the pipe under the bathroom sink was going. Fix that too. Janet said you'd settle up. He turned on the kitchen faucet. It ran clean and strong with no sound beneath it. He stood there for a moment longer than necessary. It works, Sophie observed from the doorway. Tommy Breslin is a good plumber, Liam said. Is that surprising? No, I just forget to be grateful for it. He turned off the faucet. What do you want for dinner? Something that's not from a hospital cafeteria or a highway rest stop. That narrows it significantly. Pasta, she said. The kind you make, not the kind from a box. He made pasta. He put on music. The old speakers in the kitchen that were connected to his phone by a Bluetooth that worked about 80% of the time, which was enough. Sophie sat at the kitchen table with her sketch pad and drew something he couldn't see from the stove. The furnace had the rooms warm by now. Outside the window, snow was starting again, light and directionless, the kind that didn't accumulate so much as suggest itself. This was Tuesday afternoon, he thought. This was the ordinary moment that was the actual thing. Dad, Sophie said. Yeah. Are you going back? He stirred the pasta. To New York? Yeah. I don't know yet. But you're thinking about it. I'm thinking about a lot of things. She was quiet for a moment. He heard her pencil moving. I liked it, she said. New York, the hospital, the people. A pause. Marcus? I know. If you go back, I want to come. I know that too. Mrs. Dalby said she can give me work to do on the weeks I'm away so I don't fall behind. I already asked her. He turned from the stove and looked at her. You already asked your teacher. She met his look with the expression of someone who had planned ahead and saw no reason to apologize for it. I like to be prepared. When did you ask her? I emailed her from the hospital, on day 6. He stared at her. You emailed your teacher from the hospital on day 6. I was thinking ahead, she said. She said it was fine and she actually thought it was a great learning opportunity, and could I write a report about New York for the class? Did you tell me any of this? I'm telling you now. He turned back to the pasta. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Did Mrs. Dalby say anything else? She said I was very mature for my age. Sophie said it with the complete absence of self-consciousness of someone for whom this had stopped being a notable observation. Everyone says that. They're not wrong, he said. I know, she said, and went back to drawing. Janet called Saturday morning at 8, which was when Janet called when she had things to say that couldn't wait until Monday. You're back, she said. Got in yesterday. Good. The Nguyen's are Monday at 9. Mr. Peterson wants Tuesday. The Ramirez family called 3 times. Their youngest has had a cough since before Thanksgiving, and they want you to look at her. A brief pause, the specific pause of a woman who had more to say and was deciding how to say it. And Dr. Whitfield called. Whitfield was the nearest specialist, 40 minutes away in the larger town with the larger clinic. He and Liam had a loose collegial relationship. They consulted occasionally, referred to each other when the case required it. What did he want? He said he'd heard about what happened in New York. He didn't say how. Another pause. He said he wanted to talk to you about something. He didn't sound like he usually sounds. What does he usually sound like? Tired and efficient, Janet said. He sounded like something had occurred to him. Liam put the call on his mental list. I'll reach out Monday. Also, she paused, there's a letter, physical letter, which is unusual, from a law firm in New York. I didn't open it because it's addressed to you personally, but it arrived Thursday, and it's sitting on your desk. He was quiet for a moment. Leave it there. I'll look at it Monday. It's from Syntex Legal Counsel, Janet said. It says so on the envelope. I know what it probably is, he said. Leave it. She left it. Nut. Sunday he drove out to the Calloway property. Not for any medical reason, just because Ed Calloway was 81 and his wife had died in March, and the winter check-ins were a thing Liam had been doing since his first year here. Not billed, not official, just a drive out on a Sunday afternoon to make sure Ed had firewood and working heat and food and the company of another human being for an hour. The property was 15 miles out on a road that got slippery and stayed slippery from November to March. The truck handled it fine. The tires were good, which was one of the things he actually maintained. He found Ed on the porch, which was either a testament to Montana constitutions or very poor judgment in 12-degree weather, smoking a pipe that he'd been told by 3 separate physicians to give up, and had not given up, and showed no signs of giving up. Heard you were in New York, Ed said, without preamble. News travels. Janet talks to Marlene at the grocery store. Marlene was Ed's daughter-in-law, who lived in town. You helped that CEO. I was part of a team that helped her, Liam said, which was accurate and which Ed received with the expression of a man who knew the difference between a fact and the deflection of a fact. Come inside, Ed said. I made coffee. Ed's kitchen was warm and clean in the specific way of a man who'd lived alone long enough to develop opinions about organization that his wife would have found baffling. There were 3 different brands of coffee on the counter because Ed bought whichever was on sale and didn't believe in finishing one before opening another. The coffee he made was strong enough to have a physical presence. They sat at the table. Ed drank his coffee and looked at Liam with the unhurried assessment of someone who had lived long enough that he could afford to take his time about things. You look like you went somewhere and came back different, Ed said. I went somewhere and came back, Liam said. The different part is still being determined. That's usually how it works. Ed wrapped both hands around his mug. You going back? Probably, Liam said, and realized, saying it, that at some point in the drive out here, it had shifted from probably not to probably, somewhere between the house and the highway. He hadn't noticed it happening. Ed nodded like this was the answer he'd expected. "You should," he said. "You don't know enough about it to say that." "I know you," Ed said it simply. "And I know that you've been using 10% of what you've got since you got here, which is fine. We needed the 10%. But you've got more than 10%. He looked out the window at the snow. Mara would have said the same thing. Liam was quiet. "I knew her," Ed said. "Not well. But you brought her out here once, that first summer. She sat right where you're sitting." He gestured at the chair. "She talked about you the way people talk about things they're proud of. Like you were something she'd found that was worth finding." He looked at the table. "She wouldn't want you sitting on what you've got," Ed said. "Because of her." He said it without apology, the way old men said true things. "She wasn't that kind of person." "No," Liam said. "She wasn't." They drank their coffee. Outside, a crow landed on the fence post and then left, apparently dissatisfied. The furnace in Ed's house was a good one. Liam had helped him replace it 2 winters ago, a whole-day project that had required 2 trips to town and produced the specific male bonding that comes from shared mechanical frustration. "Firewood's good," Ed said, "if that's what you came to check." "It's part of what I came to check," Liam said. "The other part being you needed to sit somewhere quiet and think." "Maybe," Ed smiled into his coffee. "You can think here any time," he said. "That's what the chair is for." The letter from Syntech's legal counsel was what he'd expected it to be. A formal notification that Syntech Global was initiating a voluntary review of all hospital clients who had implemented the pharmaceutical approval workflow system between 2017 and 2022. It was written in the careful language of lawyers who were simultaneously trying to be transparent and not create additional liability, which meant it was about 60% more words than it needed to be. But the substance was there. There was a handwritten note clipped to the front of the letter. Not on legal stationery, on a piece of note paper, the kind you buy in a small pad at a drugstore. "Liam, this is the formal version. I wanted you to see it before it goes wider. The audit has already found 2 other hospital systems with documented approval delays in the same drug category. We're still pulling records. I told you I'd tell you directly when we found things. This is me doing that. A." He sat at his desk and read it twice. Then he folded the note and put it in the desk drawer, separately from the letter. The letter he put in a file he started for this purpose, because there was going to be a process, and processes required documentation, and he was still a doctor, and documentation was a reflex. He thought about calling his attorney. He had one, a woman in Billings who'd handled the settlement paperwork after Mara's death, who he'd spoken to twice in the last 3 years for unrelated things. He'd call her eventually. The timing didn't feel right yet. Felt premature, like trying to determine the shape of something still forming. He called Whitfield instead. Whitfield was not what Liam had expected. The call Liam had been anticipating was collegial and professional. A doctor-to-doctor exchange about the New York case, maybe some professional curiosity, the kind of conversation that happened in medicine when something unusual became public knowledge. Instead, Whitfield said 4 minutes in, "I have a patient who I think has what your Sinclair case had." Liam was at his desk. He set down his pen. "Tell me." 55-year-old man, came in 2 weeks ago with syncope. Second episode in 6 months. First one was attributed to dehydration, which I always thought was thin. EKG was within normal limits both times, but there was something in the morphology I couldn't... Whitfield paused. "I couldn't articulate it, but I've been reading your 2019 case documentation since the news about Sinclair started circulating, and I think..." "Send me the EKG strips," Liam said, "and the echo if you have one." "I can do that. You're willing to look?" "Yes." A pause. "I wasn't sure if, with everything in the news, if this was appropriate to ask." "It's appropriate," Liam said. "Send it today." Whitfield sent it within the hour. Liam looked at it at his kitchen table while Sophie was doing homework across from him, and the thing Whitfield hadn't been able to articulate was right there, The same pattern, different degree, earlier in its presentation. Not as advanced as Ava Sinclair's had been when she collapsed. Catchable. He called Whitfield back. Refer him to the EP lab at Meridian General, he said. Today. Call Sung directly. I'll give you her direct line. Tell her I'm referring. She'll see him. You're sure? I'm not sure of anything. But it needs an electrophysiology study, and it needs someone who knows what they're looking for, and Sung's team is the best I've seen for this. He paused. Also, don't put him on amiodarone. He heard Whitfield write this down. Understood. And send me any follow-up you get. I want to track this. When he hung up, Sophie was watching him from across the table with her pencil stopped and her homework forgotten. What? He said. You sounded like a doctor, she said. I am a doctor. Like a different kind. Like the kind you were before. She said it without accusation, purely observational. It sounded good. He looked at her. Yeah? Yeah. She went back to her homework. You should be that kind more. Fab. January arrived with the particular lack of ceremony that January always had, just December done with itself and giving way. Liam kept his clinic days. He saw the Nguyens and Mr. Peterson and the Ramirez girl whose cough was viral and resolving, but whose parents needed the reassurance of someone telling them so in person, which was itself a form of medicine that the textbooks undervalued. He drove out to the Callaway property twice more. He fixed the gap at the bottom of the back door, which had been letting cold air in since October, and which took 45 minutes, and a piece of weather stripping he drove 20 miles to buy, and which was deeply satisfying in the specific way of small repairs. He talked to Ava 4 times in January. Calls, not texts, because she preferred calls and he'd adapted to that. She gave him audit updates in the controlled, methodical way she gave information. Facts first, implications second, what they were doing about it third. By the third call, the audit had found 4 other hospital systems with documented delays in the same drug category and at least 11 cases that warranted individual review for potential harm. 11 cases. He sat with that number after each call. Turned it over. 11 families who might have had a MARA. 11 people who might have been waiting for a drug that a routing system had held up for 36 hours or 72 hours or some other number of hours that had made the difference. He hadn't known the number was 11. He'd known there was a system and that systems had consequences. But 11 made it different. 11 had the weight of people. Are you okay? Ava asked on the third call after she'd told him the number. No, he said. Not entirely. Are you? No, she said. Not entirely. Good, he said, and meant it the way you mean something that isn't good but is necessary. The way you mean that someone's appropriate response to an appropriate situation is itself a form of integrity. On the 4th call, she said, I want to tell you the idea I mentioned before you left. The one you were going to tell me when I came back. You haven't come back yet. I'm aware. The idea doesn't require you to be here, she said. I just wanted to tell you in person, but I'm tired of waiting. He heard something in her voice that was different. Not the analytical precision she defaulted to, but something more tentative. She was less comfortable being tentative, he'd learned. It cost her something. I want to build a cardiac center, here, in New York, but not only here, a model that could replicate. The specific design philosophy is that no patient is turned away for inability to pay, that the clinical protocol is separated entirely from the financial approval process. She paused. That the kind of decision that killed your wife cannot be made by a routing algorithm. He was quiet. The funding would come from Syntech initially, but the governance would be independent, a board structure that explicitly excludes financial optimization as a primary metric, clinical outcomes only. Another pause. I've been talking to Sung and to Harmon. They're interested. He was looking out the kitchen window. The January light in Montana was thin and low, the sun moving across the sky at an angle that made the snow look blue in the shadows. That's a large idea, he said. I know. Building it would take years. I know that too. And you'd need someone with the clinical knowledge to shape the cardiac protocols. Someone who understood what a routing system can do to a patient when it's designed without accounting for the human at the end of it. Yes, she said. I'd need someone like that. You're asking me, he said. I'm telling you an idea, she said. I'm not asking you anything yet. I'm telling you the idea because you said I should tell you when I had one. He sat with it. A cardiac center. A model designed specifically around the failure that had taken Mara. Designed to make that failure impossible by architecture, not remediation after the fact, prevention by design. I need to think, he said. I know. And I'm still processing the audit findings. I know that too. He leaned back in his chair. You're patient, he said, for someone who runs everything at full speed. I'm learning, she said. You said I would. I said you'd learn Tuesday afternoons, he said. That's different. This is a Tuesday afternoon, she said. We're just talking. He thought about that. About what it meant that this, a conversation about something enormous, about something that could change both their lives in ways he couldn't fully calculate, was also, at the same time, just two people on the phone on a January Tuesday, while the light outside his window turned the snow blue at the edges. Okay, he said. Okay, you'll think about it? Or okay, something else? Okay, I'll come back, he said. For a week in February, we can talk about the idea in person. He paused. And Sung has a case she wants me in the room for. A silence on the other end of the line, not a long one. Good, Ava said. Don't make it a thing, he said. I'm not making it anything, she said. I'm just good. That's all. Sophie told Mrs. Dalby on Monday that she'd need the first week of February covered, and Mrs. Dalby, who had apparently fully committed to the position that Sophie's unconventional schedule was a pedagogical opportunity, said she'd have materials ready. Sophie reported this to Liam with the efficiency of someone ticking items off a list. What about Marcus? Sophie asked. Can we see him? He might be discharged by February. She considered this. Has he written? He emailed, twice. Liam had read them. Brief, 11-year-old emails that were mostly updates about his progress, and one very long tangent about a video game, but which had arrived with the particular weight of effort. The weight of someone who wasn't great at writing, but was doing it anyway. He's doing better. Good, Sophie said, with the satisfaction of someone whose investment had yielded returns. I want to see the portrait he drew of me again. I want to show him what I've been working on. She'd been working on a larger piece. A composite drawing she'd been building for 3 weeks. A kind of panorama of the hospital. Not the clinical parts, but the human ones. The family waiting room, the pediatric common room, the nurses' station with Denise at the center of it, the elevator bank where you ran into the chaplain Bernard, the revolving door she'd finally gotten right. She'd been working from memory and the photos she'd taken on her phone, and it was detailed in the specific way that a drawing gets when you're using it to hold on to something you don't want to lose. You're good, Liam said, looking at it. I know, she said, without ego, just assessment. Your mom was artistic, he said. He didn't say it often, tried to offer it in the right moments, the ones when it meant something rather than the ones when it was just filling space. She couldn't draw, but she had an eye. She could look at a room and see how it would look different. She rearranged furniture a lot. Sophie looked at the drawing. Maybe that's where I got it. Maybe, he said. Or maybe it's just me, she said. Maybe it's both, he said. Things can come from somewhere and still be yours. She thought about this with the seriousness she brought to things worth thinking about. Okay, she said. Yeah, both. The week before he was due to go back to New York, he got a call from a number he didn't recognize. Not a 212 area code this time, a different area code he couldn't place. He answered it. Dr. Carter? The voice was male, mid-40s, slightly uncertain in the way of someone who has rehearsed what they were going to say and has now arrived at the moment of saying it and found the rehearsal inadequate. My name is Robert Chen. You don't know me. A pause. I heard about the Syntec audit. We believe my wife is one of the cases. The 11. His voice caught slightly and then steadied. She died 4 years ago. I have 2 kids. Liam was at his desk. He sat very still. Mr. Chen, he said. I don't know why I'm calling you specifically, Robert Chen said. I found your name because of the Sinclair case. Because you're the one your connection to the audit. A pause. I guess I just wanted to talk to someone who understood what a routing system means, what 36 hours means. Someone who... He stopped. I don't know what I'm asking. You don't have to be asking anything, Liam said. A silence. Her name was Elaine, Robert Chen said. Tell me about Elaine, Liam said. And Robert Chen did. He talked for 20 minutes, stumbling at first and then finding the shape of it the way people found the shape of grief when they were finally given room for it. Not linearly, not coherently, but true. He told Liam about a woman who had been an elementary school art teacher, who had made the best dumplings he'd ever tasted, who had been afraid of moths specifically and nothing else, who had been 3 months pregnant when she was admitted to the hospital, and who had died before the 3rd trimester. Liam listened. He did not offer solutions. He did not route the conversation toward the legal process or the audit or anything practical. He listened the way Mara had listened, with the entirety of his attention, not waiting for his turn to speak. When Robert Chen was done, there was a quiet on the line that was different from the silence at the beginning. Less weight. Not resolved? You didn't resolve this ever, but slightly less airless. What should I do? Robert Chen said. About the audit, practically. Syntech's legal team will contact you directly, Liam said. You may want your own counsel to review anything they send. Don't sign anything without having it read by someone working for you. He paused. And there's going to be a process, and the process is going to ask you to do things that feel inadequate to the size of what happened. That's the nature of process. It doesn't mean you shouldn't go through it. Is it worth it, going through it? For some people, Liam said. It depends on what you need. Some people need the acknowledgement more than the resolution. Some need both. What did you need? He thought about this. He'd needed initially to not be in New York. He'd needed Montana and the clinic and Sophie and Fox pajamas and the particular quality of mornings in a quiet house. He'd needed the distance to still be himself. I needed to be somewhere I could be useful in a smaller way, he said. For a while. And then I needed to go back and be useful in the way I was built for. And those 2 things turned out to not be opposites. Robert Chen was quiet. The art teacher thing, he said. The hospital. Sophie, your daughter. She does art with the kids? Word had apparently circulated. She does, Liam said. Elaine would have... He stopped. That would have made her very happy. To know someone was doing that. Liam closed his eyes briefly, opened them. I'll tell Sophie that, he said. Please do, Robert Chen said. And then after a moment, thank you for picking up. Thank you for calling, Liam said. After he hung up, he sat at his desk for a long time. The afternoon light through the window was already going, the Montana winter dark arriving early and without apology. He heard Sophie in her room, the particular sound of drawers and shuffling that meant she was reorganizing something for reasons only she understood. 11 cases, 11 Elaines, 11 sets of kids growing up the way Sophie was growing up, with a gap where someone should be. He'd been angry at a system. He'd been angry at an institution. He'd been angry at the faceless machinery of decisions made in conference rooms by people who weren't thinking about 36 hours. Robert Chen's call didn't resolve the anger. He wasn't naive enough to think it should. What it did was give the anger a form, a specific human form. Elaine Chen, who taught elementary school art and was afraid of moths. Mara Carter, who narrated cooking to herself like a radio show. People who had become collateral damage in someone else's efficiency metrics. The anger with a human face was different from the anger without one. It had weight and direction. It pointed somewhere specific. He stood up. He went to Sophie's doorway. She was reorganizing her bookshelf in a system that appeared to involve both color and size, which he decided not to interrogate. Bug, he said. She looked up. I talked to a man today whose wife died the same way your mom did. Same system, different hospital. He said it plainly. without softening it into something she couldn't fully receive. She was 8 and she deserved the real version. His wife was an art teacher. Sophie looked at him. The particular expression again was the one that was too old for her face. "Did you tell him about me?" "He heard about you, from the hospital." She was quiet for a moment. "Is he going to be okay?" "Eventually," Liam said. "He has 2 kids, which helps." She seemed to understand what he meant by that. The specific way in which having children to take care of was both an anchor and a lifeline. The thing that required you to stay present when staying present was otherwise impossible. "Good," she said, and then, carefully, "I'm glad you picked up." "I didn't know who it was," he said. "I know," she said, "but you picked up anyway." He looked at her for a moment, then he went back to the kitchen to start dinner, and Sophie went back to her bookshelf, and the house settled around them in the particular way of houses that have been lived in and are still being lived in, the walls holding the ordinary weight of things continuing. He called Ava that evening. "I talked to one of the 11 today," he said. "A man named Robert Chen." A pause. "He called you?" "He found my name through the coverage. He needed to talk to someone." He paused. His wife's name was Elaine. She was 3 months pregnant when she died. He heard Ava absorb this. "I didn't know she was pregnant," she said quietly. "The records, they don't always—" She stopped. "No," he said. "They don't." The silence stretched for a moment. It was the kind of silence between 2 people who were both holding the same weight and both understanding that there wasn't anything that lightened it exactly, only what you did with it. "The center," Ava said finally. "The cardiac center. I've been thinking about the name." "What about it?" "I want to name it something that means what it's for," she said. "Not a donor name, not a corporate name. Something that says why it exists." "That's a conversation for when I'm there," he said. "I know. I'm just telling you I'm thinking about it." "I know you're thinking about it," he said. "You're always thinking." "Is that a criticism?" "It's a fact," he said. "I've learned the difference." She was quiet for a moment. "Liam." She used his name the way she used it now, naturally, without the formal hesitation of the early days. "I'm glad you drove from Montana." "I'm glad I answered the phone," he said. "The first time." "So am I." A pause. "Get some sleep. You sound tired." "I'm always tired." "Get some sleep anyway." He set down his phone. He stood in the kitchen in the yellow light of the overhead fixture that had needed a new bulb since September, and that he'd finally replaced last week. One small thing in a long list of small things that accumulated into the texture of a life. Through the window, the Montana dark was full and settled. The snow that had been threatening all week was finally coming, visible in the light from the porch. Steady, quiet, the kind that accumulated. Tomorrow was Monday. The Nguyens at 9. Mr. Peterson at 11. The Ramirez girl for a follow-up at 2. In 3 weeks, he was going back to New York. He turned off the kitchen light and went to check on Sophie, who was asleep in the fox pajamas that were too small now and that she was still not going to throw away. He stood in the doorway the way he stood there most nights, not long enough to be hovering, just long enough to confirm the fact of her. Then he went to bed, in a house that was fixed and warm, in a town that needed him, and slept for the first time in a long time, without the specific restlessness of a man who hasn't decided what he is yet. He'd decided. It had happened somewhere between a phone call and a kitchen light and the snow coming down steady outside a window in Montana, without announcement, without drama. Just a decision settling into place, the way decisions did when you'd been living toward them long enough. He was going back. He was also staying. Both of those things were true, and they were not a contradiction. February in New York was different from December. Not warmer. It was, if anything, meaner, the wind off the Hudson carrying a specific personal hostility that Montana cold didn't bother with. Montana cold was impersonal. It didn't care about you. New York cold in February had opinions. But the light was different, and the days were slightly longer than they'd been 6 weeks ago. And there was something in the city's particular energy that said it had survived January and was not entirely unhappy about that fact. Liam parked in the same structure 3 blocks from Meridian General. Different level this time, One floor up. A small change. The kind that only registers when you've been somewhere before. He and Sophie walked the same 3 blocks with their breath visible in front of them, Sophie's backpack bouncing, and the difference from December was that this time she was looking at things she'd already seen and finding them again rather than finding them for the first time. "The revolving door," she said when the hospital entrance came into view. "You've made peace with it." "I drew it correctly eventually," she said. "It just took a while to see it right." He pushed through the revolving door. The lobby was the same. The white ceiling, the security desk, the ambient movement of an institution that didn't stop. The same guard at the security desk looked up, and this time his expression didn't go through any recalibration. He simply said, "Dr. Carter, good to have you back." "Good to be back," Liam said, and meant it in the specific way of something that surprised him a little. Still, each time it was true. Ichwant. Sung met him on the 8th floor. She had the same quality she'd had in December, the focused efficiency of someone who ran her world precisely and didn't waste motion. But there was something slightly different in how she greeted him. Less assessment, more assumed. "The Whitfield referral came through last week," she said. "The EP study confirmed Brugada pattern, type 2. We're scheduling the ICD implant for Thursday. I'd like to be in the room." "I assumed you would. You're on the schedule." She handed him a tablet with the week's cases. "There are 2 others Harmon wants you to consult on, not cardiac. But he thinks your specific background in unusual presentations. Send me the charts tonight," he said. She looked at him. Something in her expression shifted. Subtle. The kind of shift you'd miss if you weren't paying attention. "You look different," she said. "I've been told I look tired," he said. "Not tired. Different." She considered him the way she considered complicated data. "Settled," she said finally. "You look more settled than you did in December." He thought about that. About the drive out here, which had been easier than December, so roads cleaner, Sophie less anxious, himself less braced against whatever was coming. About the decision that had stopped being a decision somewhere between January and now and had become simply a fact. "I made some choices," he said. "I can see that," she said, and handed him a coffee she'd apparently brought from somewhere, and handed to him with the same complete lack of ceremony that Okafor had that first week. He was beginning to think this was a Meridian general quality. The coffee is greeting, the gesture that said you belong here enough to get the coffee. He took it. "Where's Okafor?" "Rounds. She'll find you." Sung turned back toward the nurse's station. "Ava Sinclair's in the outpatient clinic at 2, she said over her shoulder. "She insisted on walking in." "Of course she did. I told her the chair was available." "She ignored you." "Comprehensively," Sung said. Sophie, within 40 minutes of arriving, had located Marcus. He was not, as Liam had half expected, discharged. He was on a different floor. He'd had a setback in January, a complication with his treatment that had required another round and another extended stay. And this was the specific brutal arithmetic of the kind of illness he had, where the path forward was not a line, but a series of corrections. But he was sitting up in his room when Sophie appeared in the doorway, and the expression on his face when he saw her was the kind of expression that required no interpretation. "You came back," he said. "I said I would," she said. "I know, but—" "When I say something, I mean it," she said, with the matter-of-fact clarity of a person who had not yet learned to hedge her certainties and didn't see the value in it yet. She came in and sat in the chair beside his bed and pulled out her sketch pad. "I brought you something." She showed him the panorama, the full composite drawing she'd been working on for 3 weeks. He looked at it for a long time. The pediatric common room was there, and the table where they'd worked, and his own face in the portrait she'd drawn on that first day, rendered in the background like a detail in a larger scene. "That's me," he said. "Yes. You put me in it." "You're part of it," she said, simply. As if this was not a generous thing, but a factual one. He was part of the place, and the place was in the drawing, so naturally he was there. Marcus looked at it for another long moment. Then he said, "I drew you too." He reached into the drawer of his bedside table and produced a piece of paper, folded carefully, the edges slightly soft from being handled. He unfolded it and handed it to her. It was as she'd predicted, bad in a sweet way. Her proportions were wrong, and her eyes were slightly misaligned, and she was holding a pencil in a hand that had too many fingers. But it looked like her. Something in the expression was exactly right. "The eyes," she said, pointing at the too-many-fingered hand. "You got the eyes." "That's the most important part," he said. "You told me that." "I did," she said. "You were listening." "I always listen," he said. "I just don't always show it." She looked at him with the expression she reserved for things that mattered. "I know," she said. "I can tell the difference." They sat there, the 9-year-old and the 8-year-old, with their drawings between them, and Liam, passing the doorway 10 minutes later on his way to the 4th floor, stopped long enough to see them working side by side. Sophie showing Marcus something about shading, Marcus attempting it with the focused determination of someone who'd decided that getting better at something was a form of resistance, and then kept walking, because some moments didn't need a witness, and some things were complete without him. Ava arrived at the outpatient clinic at 2:15, 15 minutes late, which he'd come to understand was her particular version of on time. She walked in with her coat still on and her phone in her hand and the specific quality of someone who had been in motion since 6 that morning and had several more things to do after this. She looked better than December. The color was there, and the particular energy that was just hers. That velocity of mind that physical illness had temporarily slowed but clearly hadn't changed. She was still Ava Sinclair. She'd just been Ava Sinclair with a device in her chest for 6 weeks, which had given her, apparently, a new relationship with her own body that she was still in the process of negotiating. "You're late," Liam said. "Traffic," she said. "You took a cab." "The cab was in traffic." She sat down in the examination room chair. Not the patient table, the chair, because that was how she did things. "How do I look?" "Like you've been working too hard." "I've been working the right amount," she said. "Which is different." "For you or for most people?" "For me," she said. "I'm not most people." He checked her. The routine follow-up, the device interrogation via the external programmer that read the ICD's stored data, the assessment of her recovery. Everything was where it should be. The device had not fired, which was the ideal outcome. Her rhythm had been stable. Her activity level was, per the device's records, consistent with a person who had been told to rest moderately and had interpreted moderately generously. "You've been exercising," he said. "Walking," she said. The device logged your heart rate during what it categorizes as moderate to vigorous activity 6 times this week. "I walk briskly." "Ava?" She looked at him with the expression of someone who has lost this argument and knows it, but would like the record to reflect that she didn't concede easily. "I feel fine," she said. "The device isn't a permission slip," he said. "You're still 6 weeks post-implant." "I know what I am 6 weeks post of," she said, with a slight edge that he recognized as frustration with limitation rather than frustration with him, which was a distinction he'd learned to make. "I know you do," he said, "and I'm telling you anyway." He set down the programmer. 3 more weeks at this pace, then we can talk about increasing activity. 3 weeks. 3 weeks. She looked at the ceiling briefly, the physical gesture of someone doing the calculation and not loving the result. "Fine," she said. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because I understand the clinical rationale and I have too much to do to have another cardiac event." She said it with the complete practicality of someone who had reorganized her relationship with her own health around function rather than fear, which was, he'd come to understand, simply the way she dealt with most things. Fear didn't move her. Function did. "That's a reasonable motivation," he said. "It's the only kind I have." She paused. "Daniel called this morning. His test came back." He looked at her. "Negative," she said. "He doesn't have it." He let out a breath he hadn't quite known he'd been holding. "Good." "Yes." She said it quietly, and in the quiet of it was everything. The weeks of waiting, the specific particular weight of carrying the knowledge that her genetics might have handed her brother the same time bomb she'd been carrying unknowingly for 30 years. "He cried," she said. "Daniel, when I told him," He said he never cries, but he cried. Of course he did. I didn't know what to do, she said. I'm not good at that. When it's emotional like that. What did you do? I stayed on the phone, she said. I didn't say anything. I just stayed on. That's exactly right, Liam said. She looked at him. Is it? It's what you're supposed to do, he said. You just be there. You don't have to fix it. She absorbed this. You're teaching me Tuesday afternoons in real time, she said. You're a fast learner, he said. She almost smiled. The almost smile was something he'd cataloged over the weeks. The various degrees of it, what each one meant. This one meant she was genuinely pleased and was trying to decide whether to let it show all the way. She let it show. The conversation about the center happened the next evening. Not in a hospital, not in a conference room. Ava had a car take them to a restaurant in Midtown that she apparently knew well, quiet enough for conversation, the kind of place that didn't ask you to perform your presence there. Sophie was with Denise, who had apparently decided that babysitting Sophie in the evenings during New York visits was something she did now, a fact that Sophie received as her due and Liam received as an enormous practical relief. They sat across from each other at a table in the back, and Ava opened a leather portfolio that contained, he discovered, 30 pages of documentation. He looked at the portfolio. He looked at her. You said we'd talk about the idea, she said. I didn't know the idea had 30 pages. These are just the preliminary frameworks, she said. There's more. He picked up the first page. He read it. Then he read it again, because the first reading had given him the outline and the second reading gave him the substance. And the substance was serious, genuinely, rigorously serious in the way that things were when someone who was very good at building things decided to build something that mattered. The center was real. On paper, it was real. The governance structure was there. An independent board with clinical expertise as the primary qualification, financial management subordinated explicitly to clinical mission. The funding model was there. Syntec providing the initial capital, with a transition plan to diversified funding over 10 years that reduced Syntec's proportional influence as the center grew. The protocol framework was there, a specific commitment to separating treatment authorization from financial routing so that no drug, no procedure, no intervention could be delayed by a cost approval system. That last part was written in plain language. Not legal language. Plain language, the kind you used when you wanted something to be understood rather than litigated around. He read it twice. He set it down. The name, he said. You said you were thinking about the name. Yes. What did you come to? She looked at him steadily. I want to call it the Mara Carter Cardiac Center, she said, if you'll allow that. He was quiet for a long time. The restaurant moved around them, soft sounds, other conversations, the particular warmth of a room full of people doing the ordinary thing of eating together. He sat with the name on the air between them and felt something move through him that he couldn't have described precisely and didn't try to. She was a pediatric nurse, he said, not cardiac. I know, Ava said, but she's the reason it exists, the reason the specific architecture of it exists, the part that makes it impossible for a routing system to make the decision that it made. She paused. I think that should have her name on it, not mine, not Syntec's. Another pause. Not yours either, before you suggest that. I wasn't going to suggest that. You were thinking it. He hadn't been thinking it, but he didn't argue. She would have hated having her name on a building, he said. I know. You told me she had no patience for that kind of thing. Ava picked up her water glass. But she's not here to argue about it. And the people who go through those doors should know why it was built. He looked at the table. He thought about Mara, about a woman who had narrated cooking to herself like a radio show and rearranged furniture because she could see how things would look different, and who had been afraid of nothing except possibly dying young, which turned out to be prescient. He thought about what it meant to put her name on something that would exist after both of them, that would keep existing when he was gone, when Ava was gone, when everyone who'd known Mara was gone. Her name on a building that had been designed specifically so that what had happened to her couldn't happen to someone else. Okay, he said. Ava set down her glass. Okay. But we're doing it right, he said. The governance structure. I want 2 additional external physicians on the clinical oversight board, people with no financial stake and no connection to Syntec. The protocol framework needs a review process with teeth, not just language. I expected that, she said. She was already turning pages in the portfolio. And the communication to the 11 families, to all the affected families from the audit, has to come before the announcement. They find out before the press does. That's non-negotiable. Also expected, she said. She turned to a page near the back. I drafted a letter. I'd like you to read it. He read it. It was the best version of an inadequate thing. There was no adequate letter for this, and Ava knew that, and had written something that didn't try to be adequate, but tried to be honest instead, which was its own form of respect. Change this paragraph, he said, pointing. She looked where he pointed. Why? Because this sentence reads like a legal disclosure. It's not bad, but it's slightly distancing. You want the distance out of this one. She read it again. You're right. She made a note. I'll revise it. They worked through the portfolio for 2 hours. He asked questions that required substantive answers, and she gave them. And when she didn't know something, she said so directly and wrote down what she needed to find out, which he'd come to understand was her version of the same thing Okafor did, admitting the gaps precisely so the gaps could be filled. By the time they'd gone through it all, the restaurant had thinned out. The waiter had refreshed their water twice without being asked, which was the restaurant's way of saying they could stay. The timeline, Liam said, for the build. 18 months to a functional facility, she said. 30 months to full operating capacity. During the build, the Meridian relationship. We've talked to Harmon, she said. During the construction phase, the center operates in partnership with Meridian. Meridian carries the clinical infrastructure. The center begins building its patient base and protocols. By the time the physical facility is done, the operational model is already tested. Sung agreed to this? Sung proposed it, Ava said. She wants to be on the clinical oversight board. He thought about that. Sung, who reviewed imaging at 8 in the morning because she trusted preparation. Sung, who had let him be in the room without managing him. Good, he said. She should be. Ava closed the portfolio. She looked at him across the table with the expression she had when she'd finished a significant piece of work, and allowed herself briefly to acknowledge it. Are you in? She said. Direct. As always. I'm in, he said. She nodded. Not a celebration, just receipt of information. But then something shifted slightly in her expression and she said, I want to say something that isn't business. Okay. I've been thinking about what you said, about presence, about just being there without a purpose. She looked at her water glass. I've been trying, with Daniel, mostly, calling him when there's nothing to report, just calling. She paused. It's harder than I thought it would be. I always feel like I should be doing something. You are doing something, he said. You're just calling. It feels insufficient. That's because you're measuring it against the wrong standard. He leaned back. You're measuring presence against productivity. They're not the same currency. She considered this. How do you know when you're doing enough? You don't really, he said. You just keep showing up and trust that showing up is the thing. She was quiet for a moment. Outside the restaurant windows, New York was doing its nighttime version of itself. The light and the motion and the specific, particular energy of 8 million people sharing geography. I think I was lonely, she said, not with self-pity, with the same clear-eyed accounting she brought to everything. Before, for a long time. I was so busy that I didn't notice, and then I was in a hospital bed and I had nothing but time to notice. Most people need something to stop them, he said, before they see what they've been moving past. What stopped you? He thought about Montana, about the choice he'd made that had looked like retreat and turned out to be necessary. Losing Mara, he said, it stopped everything, and then I had to figure out what to rebuild and in what order. Sophie first. Sophie first, he said. Then this, eventually. Do you think you would have come back without the call from Harmon? If she hadn't collapsed? He sat with that. It was an honest question, and it deserved an honest answer. I don't know, he said. Maybe not soon, maybe not like this. He paused. But I think eventually, I think I was getting ready without knowing I was getting ready. What does that mean? It means you can be moving toward something before you've admitted to yourself that you're moving toward it, he said. Sometimes the decision is made before the conscious part of you catches up. She looked at him. Is that what happened with you deciding to come back? Yeah, he said. I think so. And with whatever this is, she said, and made a small gesture between them that encompassed, he understood, the full complexity of what had accumulated over 6 weeks and 2 months and 100 phone calls and the specific reality of 2 people who had met through catastrophe and found something that didn't have a clean name yet. He looked at her steadily. Yes, he said. And with that, she didn't say anything for a moment. Then, I'm not good at this. I know. I'll probably work too much. Probably. And I'll be analytical when I should be intuitive and direct when I should be... Ava, he said. She stopped. I know, he said. I've known you for 2 months. I know what you are. He paused. I'm not good at the daily maintenance. I still wait to be needed. I'm better than I was, but I'm not fixed. He looked at her. We can be not fixed at each other and see what happens. She absorbed this. She was quiet for a long time, long enough that he wondered if he'd miscalculated, if the directness had been too much, if she needed more of the gradual approach that she was still learning. Then she said, That's the most practical romantic statement I've ever heard. You'd hate Flowery, he said. I would, she said. Deeply. But the almost smile was there, and this time it went all the way. What? He told Sophie the next morning. Not about Ava. Not in those terms. Not yet. Not before he understood it well enough himself to translate it for an 8-year-old. But about the center. About the plan. About what was going to happen over the next 2 years and what his role in it was going to be. Sophie listened with her cereal going cold in front of her, which was how he knew she was paying full attention. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. They're naming it after Mom, she said. Yes. She looked at the table. He watched her face go through something private and then come back to the surface. She'd say that was excessive, Sophie said. She would. But she'd also... Sophie stopped, started again. She'd want it to mean something real, not just a name. That's what we're building, he said. Something real. She nodded slowly. Can I visit? When it's built? You can do more than visit, he said. You can bring your sketch pad. She looked up at him. The kids, she said. In the cardiac ward. I could do what I did here. If you want to. I want to, she said immediately. No deliberation. Just the clean directness of someone who knew what they wanted and had no complicated relationship with wanting it. When I'm older, maybe I could do it properly. Like a program. He looked at her. At his daughter, who was 8 and was already building her next decade, whose mother had loved children and had given that love to Sophie in some way that wasn't nature and wasn't nurture, but was something he didn't have a category for, something transmitted, something that lasted. Yeah, he said. Maybe you could. She went back to her cereal, satisfied. Then she said without looking up, Dad. Yeah. You like Ava. He was quiet for a moment. She's someone worth knowing, he said carefully. That's not what I said. Sophie. I'm just saying, she said, with the complete composure of a person who had said the thing she intended to say and was content with having said it. I like her too. She doesn't talk to me like I'm a kid. You're not particularly kid-like, he said. Exactly, she said, as if this settled it, and finished her cereal. The last thing that happened in February, the thing that settled the entire complicated 6-week architecture into something he could hold, was Robert Chen. He came to the hospital on the Thursday of the 2nd week, the day of the Whitfield referral patient's ICD implant. He'd driven up from Philadelphia, where he lived now, and he sat in the family waiting room on the 4th floor. The same waiting room, the same couch, the same window, and waited. He was 42 and looked like someone the last 4 years had treated imperfectly. which was to say, he looked like most people who'd been through something real. He was holding a coffee from the lobby cart with both hands the same way Ed Calloway held his mug on Sunday mornings. And when Liam came in, he stood up with the slightly uncertain quality he'd had on the phone. "Dr. Carter." "Robert." Liam shook his hand. "You didn't have to come in person." "I know," Robert Chen said. "I wanted to." He looked around the waiting room. "This is where your daughter—" "This is where Sophie spent a lot of time, yes." Robert nodded. He seemed to be taking the room in as a fact, absorbing it, adding it to whatever architecture he was building in his head of the story. "I wanted to tell you in person that the process it's moving. The legal part. Syntech's team has been—" He paused. "They've been decent. Not perfect, but decent. Ava Sinclair called me herself. I wasn't expecting that." "She does things directly," Liam said. "She apologized," Robert said. Not legal language. She just said she was sorry. She said Elaine's name." He looked at the window. "Nobody official has ever said Elaine's name before. It sounds stupid, but it doesn't sound stupid," Liam said. "She said Elaine." He said it quietly, to himself as much as to Liam, turning the fact over. "And she didn't try to explain or justify. She just named her, acknowledged her." Liam sat down. Robert sat back down. The family waiting room held them the way it held everyone who'd ever sat in it, without judgment, without ceremony, just as a room that had held a lot of weight over the years and had gotten good at it. "How are your kids?" Liam said. "They're okay. Robert smiled briefly, the specific, complicated smile of a parent navigating something impossible. "My daughter started kindergarten in September. She's 5. She looks like Elaine." He paused. "That's hard some days and good other days." "Yeah," Liam said. "That's how it works." "Your daughter," Robert said. "Sophie, she—" He stopped. "This is going to sound strange." "Go ahead." "When Ava Sinclair told me about what you're building, the center, the name," he looked at Liam. "She told me about Sophie, about what she does in the pediatric ward, and she said your daughter is going to set up a formal art program there eventually." He paused. "Elaine would have given anything to be part of something like that. She used to talk about hospital art programs for kids. She said it was the most important thing nobody was doing well." His voice held. "I just wanted you to know that what Sophie is building, what you're both building, Elaine would have wanted to be part of it." Liam sat with that for a moment. Let it settle the way things needed to settle, without rushing it. "I'll tell Sophie," he said. "She'll understand what that means." "I hoped you would." Robert looked at the window. "I'm going to donate," he said, "to the center. Not a lot. I don't have the kind of money that—" "It doesn't work like that," Liam said. "The governance structure isn't built on large donors. The center's funding comes from sources that can't make clinical demands. Every contribution matters the same way." Robert nodded slowly. "Elaine would have donated her time," he said. "She never had money. She always had time." "Time is what it's for," Liam said. "That's the whole point of it. Time." They sat there for a while in the family waiting room, the two of them, with the weight of what they'd both lost and the specific, imperfect, irreducible fact of what they were still doing with it. 1 year after Ava Sinclair collapsed on a stage in Midtown Manhattan, the Mara Carter Cardiac Center opened its doors. It wasn't a grand opening. Ava had specifically prohibited grand openings, calling them performative with the precise disapproval she reserved for things that looked right without being right. There was a small ceremony. There were the people who had built it, sung, who gave a speech in the specific style of someone who had a lot to say and had disciplined it into something short and true. Harmon, who stood in the back and looked at the clinical suite with the expression of a man who was allowing himself briefly to be satisfied. Okafor, now a fellow, who had driven the protocol development with the systematic intensity that was becoming the defining quality of her professional life. Robert Chen was there. He'd come from Philadelphia with both his kids, the 5-year-old who looked like Elaine, and an 8-year-old boy who spent most of the ceremony quietly looking at everything around him with the particular focused attention of a child who was taking inventory. Sophie was there. She'd brought her sketch pad naturally. During the ceremony, she sat in the second row and drew the room. Not the building's exterior, not the placard with her mother's name on the wall, but the people. The faces of the people who'd come, each one rendered with her specific, accurate eye, each one a record of this specific moment at the beginning of something. Liam stood at the front of the room and said the things that needed to be said, briefly, without performance, in the plain language he'd always preferred. He talked about why the center existed. He talked about what a routing system could do when it was designed without accounting for the human at the end of the delay. He said Mara's name. He said Elaine's name. He said the names of the others from the audit who had agreed to have their names acknowledged, 6 of the 11, each of whom had found in the acknowledgement something different, something specific to what they needed. When he was done, he stepped back. Ava was next. She stood at the front of the room in the particular way she stood when she was being fully present rather than performing presence. Still, grounded, her hands at her sides, no teleprompter, no notes. She talked about what she'd built before this and why it had been built the wrong way, and she didn't soften it or explain it away or position it as an industry-wide problem, or any of the other things that people did when they talked about their own failures in public. She said, I built a system that prioritized efficiency over what happened to the person at the end of the process. I didn't know what I was doing, and then I did know, and I had to decide what kind of person I was going to be after I knew. She said it like that. Those words in that order. And the room was quiet in the way rooms go quiet when someone says something true that costs them something. She looked at Liam when she said it, just for a moment. Then she looked back at the room. When she sat down, Sophie leaned over from the second row and tapped Liam's arm. He turned. She's good, Sophie whispered. She is, he said. She means it. I know. Sophie nodded, satisfied, and went back to her drawing. Dad. The center's first patient was admitted 3 hours after the ceremony ended. She was 58, referred from a clinic in the Bronx where the attending physician had flagged an unusual EKG, and the patient had told him she couldn't afford the specialist. She arrived in a cab, alone, with a canvas bag and the specific combination of fear and defiance that came from spending your life navigating a medical system that made you feel like a burden. Her name was Gloria. She was met at the door by Okafor, who told her what the center was, how it worked, what it would cost her, which was nothing, and showed her to an examination room that was clean and well lit and had a window. Gloria sat in the examination room and looked at the window and said, Nobody told me places like this exist. They're new, Okafor said. We're the first. The first, Gloria said. She absorbed this. Why does it have a woman's name on the outside? Because a woman named Mara was the reason it was built, Okafor said. What happened to her? She died because a system failed her, Okafor said plainly. So we built a system that couldn't. Gloria was quiet for a moment. She looked at the window. Then she looked at Okafor. Well, she said, tell Mara thank you. Okafor looked at her for a moment. Then she said, I will. Liam drove back to Montana 10 days after the opening. Sophie was in the passenger seat. She was 9 now. Her birthday had been in April, which he'd acknowledged with a small dinner she'd requested because she didn't want a party. She'd wanted pasta and a long drive to look at the stars, which was what they'd done. The Fox pajamas had finally been retired in March, not thrown away but folded and placed in the box at the top of the closet where certain things were kept. The drive was the same highway, the same geography, the landscape de-wintered now. Late spring in Montana, the fields greening in the particular tentative way of northern springs, like the color wasn't sure it was allowed yet. Sophie was reading. She'd been reading for 2 hours, which was normal. She looked up occasionally to check the landscape and then went back. They were somewhere in Wyoming when she said, without preamble, Are you happy? He thought about it. Not the automatic answer, the actual answer, The one that required looking at the full picture and being honest about what you saw. Most days, he said. Yeah. That's good, she said. You? She considered this with the seriousness she brought to direct questions. I think so, she said. I like the school here, and I like New York when we go, and I like that Marcus emails now. A pause. He's getting better at it. He is. I think he just needed practice, she said, at things that scared him. He glanced at her. She was looking out the window, watching Wyoming. He thought about what it meant that she understood this, that she was 9 and already had the architecture of this particular truth. That the things that scared you didn't get smaller. You just got bigger relative to them, through practice and through time and through the choice to keep going toward them rather than away. Your mom would be proud of you, he said. She was quiet for a moment. I know, she said. Not arrogance, just the clear-eyed certainty of someone who had decided a long time ago to trust what she'd been told about a person she couldn't remember. He drove. The road stretched out ahead of them, long and known and going somewhere specific. Not the same somewhere as 3 years ago, not quite the same man behind the wheel, but the same truck, the same daughter, the same sky doing its enormous impersonal thing above them. He thought about Ava, who was in New York running a company and a cardiac center and learning Tuesday afternoons 1 week at a time, who called him on Sundays now because she'd decided Sunday was the day she was going to practice being present without purpose, and who was not good at it yet and was getting better. He thought about Robert Chen's daughter, who looked like Elaine. He thought about Gloria, who'd been admitted 3 hours after the opening and who Okafor had texted him about last week. Doing well, medication adjusted, follow-up scheduled, no routing system between her and what she needed. He thought about the gap at the bottom of the back door that he'd fixed in January and the weather stripping that had held through a Montana winter without complaint. He thought about Ed Calloway and the coffee strong enough to have mass and the chair in his kitchen that was there whenever Liam needed to sit somewhere quiet and think. He thought about the observation room above the EP lab and standing on the wrong side of the glass and what it had felt like to step back into a room where the work was being done and find that he still knew how. He thought about the knowledge you carried, the specific, hard-won, irreplaceable kind that didn't come from textbooks, but from years and cases and the accumulated weight of paying attention. How long he'd kept it in a drawer, how much it had cost to keep it there, how much it had cost to take it back out. He didn't have a lesson to draw from any of it. He was suspicious of lessons, suspicious of the clean packaging of experience into something portable and transferable. Life wasn't like that. The things that mattered were too specific, too particular to the person living them, to be reduced to something you could hand to someone else and have them carry the same way. What he had instead was this: a road and a daughter and a place to go back to. A place in New York that had his wife's name on the outside and his fingerprints on the inside. A patient named Gloria who'd sat in a clean room with a window and said thank you to a woman she'd never met, who had died because a system had failed her, and in failing her had set something in motion that none of them, not Liam, not Mara, not the executives who'd built the routing workflow, and not the hospital that had implemented it, had intended or predicted or could have planned. That was the thing about consequences. They didn't ask permission. They just went where they went, out through the world, touching things you'd never know they touched. And sometimes, not always, not neatly, not without cost. What came back was something you could live with. He drove through Wyoming and into Montana, into the particular sky that knew him, and the road went ahead of him for as far as he could see, which was far and clear, and his.